Council meeting for September 18th of 2023. Please rise while a good friend of ours and the unofficial pastor to the First Official Church of Summerwood Townhouses leads us in prayer.
Dear Heavenly Father, we gather tonight with hearts full of gratitude for all that you give us. We are so blessed, the beautiful weather we've been having. And now tonight especially, we thank you for this community, for the people that make it what it is. And we know that you've got your hand over us. We thank you for the staff. And now we thank you for the people in this room. We ask for guidance that we can have a civil conversation and guidance to make decisions that are pleasing to you. And all God's people said, amen.
Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Finance Officer Bob Zine, please call the roll.
Okay, Tupper.
Here.
Bueller. Here. Danforth.
Here.
Holeen.
Here.
Jurens.
Here.
Peters.
Here.
Shetty.
Here.
Thank you.
Quorum is established. The chair will entertain a motion to approve today's agenda. Motion made by Councilman Bueller, seconded by Councilman Shetty. Any discussion on that, council? Motion is to approve the agenda. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. We're going to go to open forum. If there is anyone here who would like to address the council on a topic that is not on today's agenda, now is your time to do so. I'll close the open forum. We'll go straight into our agenda with presentation. We'll go first to public hearings and second readings. Item A is an application for a transfer of a retail malt beverage and South Dakota farm wine license and video lottery license from Rock McGillivray, thank you, anyway, doing business as Rock McGillivray, to doing business as Four Amigos LLC, and who is that going to? To the Four Amigos, okay, there we go. Oh yeah, to the Four Amigos. Oh, add Four Amigos, So motion to approve the application of the transfer from McGillivray to Four Amigos, essentially. Actually, we will open up a public hearing first. We will go to our Finance Officer, Bob Zine, for more information.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, before the council, this is basically just a transfer of ownership. The license is inactive currently, and it will remain inactive with the new owner. Fees have been paid, and the notice of hearing has been published. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will open up a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this item? You don't have to. I'll just say one of the interested parties is here if there are any questions. But seeing no one come forward for public hearing, I will open it up for council action. Do I have a motion to approve the application? So moved. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Peters. Any discussion on this, council? Councilman Tupper.
This would probably be for Finance Director Bob Zine. How long can a license be inactive?
I believe it is 2 years.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Any further discussion, council? Hearing no further discussion and no evidence to the contrary, I'll just take a voice vote. All those in favor will please now say aye. 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 Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item B is a second reading of an ordinance amending the zoning map of the city of Watertown, South Dakota in the Block 2 of Kranz Edition from its current designation of R1 Single Family District to C2 Local Commercial District. We'll go to our Public Works Director, Heath Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. This is a parcel of land on northerly Highway 81. And the applicant is pursuing a C2 zoning district as described in the background information in the council packet. Pull up a map here to share on Teams. This area outlined in turquoise is the parcel in question. Again, it's on North Highway 81, roughly across from Great Plains Lutheran School there. And this went through the planning commission and was recommended for approval by them to this board. And second reading, so any action tonight would make this final decision. And I'll stand by for any questions along with the community development manager, Hanton.
All right. Is there anyone who would like to come forward for the public hearing aspect of this? Just want to alert the council that Megan Norgard, who testified against this at the last meeting, was unable to make it tonight. She just asked the council to please remember her remarks, and that was it. So, anyone else who would like to testify? All right, we'll close the public hearing, open up for council action. Do we have a motion to approve the amendment? Motion made by Councilman Danforth, seconded by Councilman Jurens. Any discussion on this, council? Councilman Danforth.
Well, I can certainly relate and understand the concerns of the current owners. But in looking how that part of Highway 81 and what our goal is in the longer term and getting that transition to truly be commercial along that strip, to me, that makes sense for this. It doesn't make any sense, in my opinion, to leave it residential and potentially have a home or homes built there when our goal is to completely have that as a commercial area, which all around it, north and south, is. So that's the reason why I believe it's a good decision for us. We'll move forward with it.
And I just, any further discussion? Councilman Bueller?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a question. If I direct this one to Community Development Manager Hanton, if you would take up a microphone, I'd appreciate it. You know, I know I've mentioned this before. We've been down this road before with the property just adjacent to that to the north. And it's kind of the same thing just down the road. It's very similar to what we ran into before. One concern I would have, I guess, is, and there may be already provisions for screening for that property on the north side of the residence. Do we have that in place? And if so, what kind of screening are we looking at?
Yes, thank you, Councilman Bueller. So there is, in our landscape and lighting standards, you have to, if your parking lot is adjacent to a residential district, then you have to have screening, appropriate screening, which would be a fence or a vegetative buffer.
And the city, or the developer be responsible for that, is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah.
Councilman
Okay,
Shetty?
thanks. Thank you.
You have a question?
Sure, thank you, Mayor. Actually, more just, I concur with Councilman Danforth, because, you know, if I was on the corner there, I'd have similar concerns and as a resident living there, but you look at what we're doing with Highway 81 and some of those major arteries going commercial, it's, yeah, it kind of how it's got to play out. So but Councilman Danforth put it well, just I agree with him.
Any further discussion before Councilman Danforth speaks a second time? Councilman Jurens.
I would concur that this is known to be commercial development along a major highway in this area, and it just makes the most sense.
All right. I would also like to just point out for my topic is that this is an example where R1 butts up right against commercial. It does happen quite often in Watertown, so it's not unheard of. Granted, this location makes more sense than a lot of others, but to say that it doesn't happen is not true. In fact, it happens quite often. So, any further discussion before Councilman Danforth speaks a second time? Councilman Danforth.
It really isn't specific to the topic here, other than what Councilman Bueller was referencing. And I know that obviously when you put a fence up, and there's criteria for that provides a known element of screening. Where we've ran into problems in the past is if I'm going to put up a vegetative screen, it can take years and years for that to come to fruition where it provides anything to that neighbor, if ever. And to me, that's something that's wrong with our ordinance requirement. In those scenarios, you know, I think the people, and I'm going to, in this particular case, I'll use the residents there, but my expectation is I'm going to have screening that's going to be afforded to me sooner than later. So, that may be something that we want to just take a look at, what our screening requirements are in certain situations. That's just a point I'd like to make. Maybe that's something that staff or a work session or something at some point in time. But it doesn't do any good to have a screening requirement and then take a decade for the bushes to grow or the trees to grow or whatever that is. So just food for thought.
Our city manager, Mack, has something to say.
Thank you, Mayor. We can make note of that, and as we get to that chapter entitled during our recodification process, it can be part of the discussion then.
All right, thank you very much. Any further comments? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the amendment. All those and hearing no opposition, I'll call a voice vote. Let's do a voice vote.
Okay. Tupper?
Yes.
Bueller? Danforth?
Yes.
Pauline?
Yes.
Jurgens?
Yes.
Peters?
Yes.
Shetty?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Before we go to item C, the chair would like to take a moment to preface this conversation of the next four items, all on commercial lake zoning. I just want to start off by saying that there's been a lot of conversation about commercial lake zoning over the last several months, but this conversation has been going on for over 5 years now. And so the conversations have contained multiple dozens of meetings. It originally started in early 2018 when they were talking about bringing a resort to across the street from Lake Compesca. And that's what spurred it, because there was no procedure, there was no zoning mechanism in place that would allow anything to go at Lake Compesca, or at least not a lake zoning issue. So that's what spurred the conversation, and that group met for a long time. I will point out that there was 3 members who were then and still are on our plan commission who were in on all of those meetings at that time throughout that process. And that committee met for a long time, and that actually helped instigate the interest of other citizens to form the Lake Compesca Master Plan study. So the Lake Compesca Master Plan actually came as a result, kind of the conversation about commercial lake zoning. And that has been going on for quite some time. Those ordinances were passed before COVID, but they only really became a thing in the past several years. And as they have become more of a topic of conversation, as more applicants have come forward, more concern has been raised by the citizens. And I think that it is almost universal up here among the council that we believe that we could do this CL zoning a little bit better. I think we are considering several amendments tonight, but I don't think any one of us thinks that that is where the process has to end. With that said, I have had a member request for a subcommittee of the council, but I would just like to point out that according to our city manager form of government, Article 2, Section 2.01, the city council is supposed to act as a body to form policy. And therefore, rather than commit a subcommittee to the process, I'm going to call a special council meeting combined with the Plan Commission, whose only topic is CL zoning. At that meeting, we will take public testimony. We will consider every single idea that has ever been proposed for CL. That's from a councilman, that's from a citizen, it doesn't matter. Every single idea will have its day in court, and then the council, along with the council of the Plan Commission, will take those into consideration, we'll debate them, and we will vote them up or down as to beginning the process of amending CL. So if the council agrees at that time to amend, and there's no limit to how many there could be, or how few, that would then start the process of going to the Plan Commission for a full revamp, potentially, of the CL. What I'm saying is everything is under consideration when it comes to CL. And the timeline for that process is going to be sometime in November before Christmas. And we are doing that simply because the council is having a strategic planning session in early November, and I would like the council to weigh in on what they would like that process and to be, and also to come forward at that time with their formal ideas as to what they would like to debate at that, as far as specific amendments would be. I have talked this over with our city manager, Mac. She's in agreement that this is a good step to look at and do a big deep dive. As far as like wiping everything clean and starting fresh, I feel that we've been working at this for 5 years, and we've had multiple work sessions as a council, and we all agree something could be done better, but starting with a framework is probably a better place to start from and then make that better than to start all over and start a 5-year process all over again, potentially. So that is the announcement that I would like to do. I would also like to say that the council, myself included, have heard from many members of the community that have expressed concern over several of the CL zoning amendments tonight. I have taken the opportunity to collect some of those questions from the emails and then also from the last hearing, the first reading, specifically upon the item, it would be item F would be the one that spurred the most conversation and questions. And I know these questions are going to be asked again, so I have asked our staff, including Public Works Director Von Eye and our Community Development Manager Hanton, to address the questions that I know are going to be asked so that we can all start with the same slate and so that the public knows that their questions have been heard and are being at least addressed. Public Works Director Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. Is at this time, is that when you'd like me to give a tee up of the item for action tonight?
I think you can answer the questions that we know that we will have.
Perfect. You want to do like a Q&A from you and?
No, I gave you the list of questions. You can read off the questions.
All right, perfect. Well, hopefully my memory and notes don't fail me now, so if I miss something, please speak up. Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. Some of the questions at hand that we have heard off and on throughout the last several weeks, several months maybe, as certain locations have been considered for the CL zoning district. One of them had to do with the CL uses, and there's a common statement being made that anything can be done on CL zone property, or that the sky is the limit, or that, you know, insert phrase here that makes it sound like there's an unlimited amount of things that a CL zone property can do. And the answer to that concern or that question is that there's a very definitive list of things that can be done on CL zone property. And I'll share my screen here and show exactly what that list is and talk about a little bit of the differences between permitted and conditional uses. Zoom in here. So this is the chapter in the zoning ordinance that refers to the Lake Commercial District as it was established a few years back. The permitted uses, these are things like in any zoning ordinance. This would be the same for our R1, our residential zoning districts. This would be similar to our commercial zoning districts throughout town, the C2, the C3 districts that we have, in addition to this CL district. All the industrial uses in town. Every one of those sections of the zoning code have what's called permitted uses and conditional uses. The permitted uses that are proposed in this amendment would include what's shown here: retail establishments, service establishments, restaurants, recreational uses, recreational facilities, and religious institutions. Those are the things that the landowner, once their property is zoned CL, can do on their property without seeking any additional approval from any board. They don't have to go to the Planning Commission, they don't have to go to the Board of Adjustment, they don't have to go to the City Council. These are the things they can just go and do. However, before they can just go and build and do, they still have to follow the development regulations of the city. So they'd come in for a building permit, and the city staff would administratively carry out all the regulations required for any kind of building permit, which includes a grading plan, a site plan, how's their access and parking going to fit into the equation, what are their building setbacks. In this case, we know we're dealing with a CL. We'd look at the coverage requirement, and only 50% of their land can be covered by development improvements. So there's a lot of stuff they'd have to follow, a lot of regulations they have to follow that's administered by staff when they come in to actually develop the land. But from a use standpoint, these are the things that they can do right out of the gates and carry out. Conditional uses are just that, as titled. They are based on conditions and approval by the Board of Adjustment. All conditional use applications go to the BOA, which is a function of our Planning Commission. It's a separate hat that they wear, and the Board of Adjustment considers all variances and all conditional uses. So they first would have to bless one of these conditional uses from being used on a CL zone parcel. But not only that, they can also administer additional conditions on that use, like the screening that we just talked about in the previous action. If our ordinances don't already cover adequate screening for one of these uses based on its proximity to an adjacent property, the BOA can administer more strenuous screening requirements, for example. That'd be one condition that they could put on any one of these conditional uses. But before a landowner can do any of these things, they have to go to the Board of Adjustment. There's a public notice of that meeting and a public hearing of that meeting that would allow any neighboring property to voice opposition, concern, or favor for any of these conditional uses. So it's a lot more strenuous of a process to get a conditional use carried out, but that's what that looks like. So again, permitted uses, day one, these are the things that the landowner can do. Conditional uses, they have to go through additional vetting by the Board of Adjustment. And that is what can be done on CL land, what you see right here on this page. Nothing more. This is it. And so we just want to make sure it's clear that it's not a blank check for commercial development to run rampant in a CL zoning district, but just like every other commercial district, it's got its list of permitted and conditional uses. Sorry, that explanation took a little longer. I'll hope to be more abbreviated here on the other questions. How can any of these uses be controlled? Well, I just answered that by explaining what can be done. The permitted uses are controlled in respect to the additional subdivision regulations, building codes, and engineering design standards that staff carry out anytime one of these permitted uses come in to our office to get a building permit or to see site development. They have to abide by a litany of things that are in all those regulations. Subdivision regulations are Chapter 24 of our city ordinances. Our building codes are adopted by Chapter 5 of our city ordinances, and our engineering design standards are also adopted by ordinance, but are a thick book of engineering design standards for all the public infrastructure. So that's how these get regulated and controlled, so to speak. And then the conditional uses, I already explained that. They go to the BOA. The BOA determines which one of these can be approved for any given site. Again, that's a site-specific application that the board is considering, and they would say yes or no to one of these and or add any additional conditions to it. And that's how those would be controlled or regulated, along with the aforementioned other regulations that the staff would carry out. There's been concerns expressed about infrastructure, for any commercial development around the lake. So the public infrastructure would include your streets, your highways, your roadways, your pathways, your sidewalk, your bike paths, your wastewater collection system, your water distribution system, electric, gas, all the public infrastructure that's related to any development. And so when you look at all those pieces of infrastructure that we have around any of our lake areas that are annexed into the city, at this point in time, there aren't any red flags for any commercial development around the lake that would be an alarming circumstance. Our wastewater system has a certain amount of capacity remaining that's adequate and not of a direct concern at this point in time. Our street network is what it is, and it could sustain quite a bit more traffic than it sees now today. I know there's concerns about the widths of the roadway and things of that nature, but through that development process that I just explained for every site that gets improved, the staff would administer those regulations, some of which include requiring more or further studies from the developer. Say, for instance, the traffic generation was a concern. We could require a traffic impact analysis of the developer based on the amount of traffic their development is proposed to generate. And that TIA would then assess the current roads, the proposed development, the proposed access points, and then also identify any concerns. That gets performed by a licensed engineer. It gets reviewed by our engineering staff, and we vet that from a traffic impact perspective. Wastewater system, we've got a sanitary sewer study that we've recently performed that showed some choke points, if you will, some bottlenecks in the system that we know we need to expand lift station capacity, increase the size of our sewer mains, things like that. And there are no red flags of concern for anything yet at this point. Now, that's not to say that something couldn't get zoned CL and they want to bring in XYZ commercial use that promotes this certain amount of wastewater contribution to our system. We would then assess that in the development process and make the developer pay for the improvements that they would need to have to sustain their development, is typically how that works. But as it sits right now, there's no red flags or concerns for further development around the lake. Wetlands, that's another concern that's frequently noted. This one, it's a sensitive subject for good reason. We all want to see the wetlands preserved, and we don't want any zoning or development to impact those. The first thing I'd like to clarify is that no zoning, there isn't any zoning that the city would do that would have an immediate detrimental impact on the wetlands. Zoning is a use-based blessing that the city says, yes, you can do these things on your property, but on the backside of that, there's all those regulatory things that staff carry out, and filling in wetlands is one that it falls into the grading permit function that staff performs. We'd get a site plan from the developer, we'd see the grading plan. If that grading plan was impeding into any area of wetland, either known jurisdictional wetland or potential jurisdictional wetland, staff would see that as a red flag. We'd make that comment back to the developer's engineer, say, hey, you're filling in a wetland, what gives? Did you meet all the requirements with the Corps of Engineer? Did we get everything checked off that we need to? And so wetlands, they are protected at multiple levels, at the federal level, the state level, the local level. And so I want to instill into everybody that it shouldn't be a fear of a rezone function that our wetlands are going to disappear. That simply does not give anybody any level of authority to do anything to our wetlands. It's simply blessing that land for that land use. All the physical work that goes on, the grading and stuff, that gets checked off in detail, and wetlands do not get filled without the proper boxes being checked, not only at the city office, but at the federal level with Corps of Engineers. Why not a planned unit development? That's another question that frequently comes up with commercial lake. Planned unit developments are a specific, I'll call them exception to some of our zoning ordinances. It's really its own unique thing that the developer can design and put, then they are required, if they go with a planned unit development, otherwise known as a PUD, they're required to pour into that PUD plan a high level of detail. Up here, and these, if something gets zoned and used, they don't have to tell at the point of zoning where their buildings are going to go, where their access is going to be, all those specifics. But a planned unit development does drill into that level of detail. It's kind of its own standalone tool as well, and it's one of the caveats to it is you have to have a minimum of 5 acres in order to propose a planned unit development for zoning. I would say that one of the reasons that 5 acre minimum exists is because without it, you could have any one small residential lot apply for a PUD. And that is really, I know the term spot zoning gets used a lot, but essentially if we were to reduce the PUD footprint to say a half acre or remove the minimum size altogether, what you end up with is a lot of small parcels in town that could come forward with a PUD, a planned unit development, and create all this little spot zoning all throughout our community, because it is its very own unique use of land and blessing by the Planning Commission and Council in order to perform that use. So that's why the planned unit development has a minimum of 5 acres. I think it makes sense from a standard planning practice that you would see some kind of minimum threshold like that applied to a PUD. Also, why not a PUD? Frankly, in this case, it's because the applicant hasn't applied for one. We typically don't push a certain type of zoning district onto an applicant. They know in their business plan or in their personal plan, whether it's residential, commercial, whatever it might be, they know what they want to do. And so we guide them the best we can as staff to let them know what those uses, allowed uses, permitted, and conditional uses are. And they come forward with their own application. And in this case, the owners have not applied for planned unit development, but rather wanted to exercise the CL zoning district. What happens if the land changes ownership? Well, much like any parcel in town, you know, somebody buys my house tomorrow, they can't tear it down and build a convenience store there. They have to follow the same zoning ordinance that exists today on my parcel of land that I own in town. So it'd be no different in this case. The current owners, they want it zoned CL to potentially perform any of these permitted uses. Maybe we'll apply for conditional use down the road, I don't know. But if they did, those conditional uses were approved would be carried on to a new buyer. And these permitted uses as well would be the same allowable uses for a new buyer or a new owner. So really, nothing really changes in perspective of the regulatory side. The new owner can still only do these permitted uses, and they can only apply for and get these conditional uses. But conditional uses would carry forward to a new owner, and permitted uses are what they are. The new owner could carry on any one of those, even if not carried on today. Let's see. One more question that's come up is this land is obviously currently in the county. That's why it's being applied for annexation and zoning. And why not develop this in the county was one of the questions. Well, anytime the county gets an application for a building permit that's within our joint jurisdiction area, they look at that parcel of land in proximity to the city limits. And for good reason, we have this joint jurisdiction area. It's a benefit to the city because the county will then typically kick them to the city and make sure that, and vet the process of annexing and zoning it in the city. That way, that land gets built, developed, laid out, roads get built, infrastructure gets expanded in a way that the city controls through our development regulations. And I use that term control in a way that it produces an outcome that as the city expands, we're growing into areas that look and feel and act and are a lot like the rest of the city because they've been built to our standards. If the county didn't do that and they just permitted it according to their standards, you can imagine there's a stark difference between development regulations in the county versus the city. So that always becomes the first step is the county kicks it to the city. Now, if it turns out this is not a parcel of land, the city's not interested in annexing, then the owner would have to go back to the county and say, okay, now what can I do? The city's turned me down. They don't want me in the city limits. But that's why that process carries out the way that it does. I believe I hit most everything, Mayor, unless there's something I missed that you want to.
I think you got most of them, and if we missed one, I'm sure it'll come up later. That was just a leniency that I wanted to provide because I wanted to show the community that we are listening and we are tracking what the questions are, and we are finding answers to them that hopefully, whether you agree with the answer or not, you at least know that we sought one out and got one. So I will provide some leniency to the council now if you have a question regarding the questions, but also please know that the public hearings on the actual specific items have not yet commenced. Councilman Danforth.
Just a comment, Savannah, in regards to the wetland scenario, and you know, there's two versions of that, right? Those that are formally designated in some manner as a wetland versus wetland, right? And the perception is that if there's water there and there's reeds or whatever, that it's a wetland. Well, it might be, but it may not fall under what you described. It might have no limitations on it from a landowner or developer standpoint. Is that correct?
I think if I understand what you're asking, Councilman Danforth, if we get an application and there's this low-lying area that we know has got cattails in it, but we don't see it on our jurisdictional wetland map, what we would do then is require the developer to get a determination from the Corps of Engineer, a jurisdictional determination to determine, even though it's not on their current map, is this a jurisdictional wetland?
But then there's certainly the possibility, because I went through myself, where they go, it's not, you can do what you want with it. And I think that's
Correct.
where, this isn't an argument or anything, this is, a lot of the public perception is that when that goes away, that we're destroying wetlands. And technically, we are in some manner, but it's not protected. So there are going to be times where in our community, around our community, whether it's CL or it's not, where lands that people call wetlands can be altered and they can be changed and they may go away. It's fact. We see it all the time. So that's just a caveat to that, is it can happen, but it's a matter of where does the jurisdictional aspect of that land lie? Because there are certain ownership rights that the people have, and if it's not jurisdictionally controlled, they have the right to do what they want with that land.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree with completely.
All right, we'll move on to item C, a second reading of an ordinance of a zoning text amendment to Chapter 21.29, CL Lake Commercial District of the revised ordinances of the City of Watertown. Director Von Eye, the floor is still yours.
Thank you, Mayor. So this is the second reading. With any action tonight, if approved, this is what would become the new Chapter 21.29 CL District zoning ordinance. I'll highlight a couple of the changes here quickly, excuse me, if I may. In permitted uses, we've struck any campground, storage shops, and apartments from permitted and slid them down into the conditional uses. And again, it just went through what the differences are there. We've added boat repair shops to conditional uses and provided a clear definition on what exactly that means. I believe this used to say repair shops, which could house, auto repair and things like that. But the intent behind that was that conditional use be for marine-based repairs, jet skis, boats, things of that nature, that could make sense for a commercial lot around the lake to perform the function of. With that, and with subsequent action here later in the subsequent items, we also went through the definition sections and we updated also the campground section of our zoning ordinance. I think that pretty well covers everything I wanted to touch on, but I can stand by for any further discussion or questions.
Thank you very much. Chair will open up a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to talk regarding the amendments of changing things from permissible to conditional and also the definitions? Even though we know who you are, please recognize yourself.
My name is Glenn Vilhauer. I tell you what, it's different sitting in this side of the room versus where you folks are. I want to speak tonight, your comments, Mayor, about what your plan is going forward will probably short tail a lot of my comments I was going to make tonight. So in the interest of time, I'll keep it very brief, I promise. I just want to add my thoughts because you referenced that this discussion started about 5 years ago roughly. Well, it goes back much further than that. I was in the council for 8 years, but it goes back much further than that. That there was always this thought that we are underutilizing Watertown's greatest asset. And that comment was coming from both lake as well as non-lake residents. And that, you know, what can we do for more recreation as well as some commercial development around the lake? So there was that desire going back a long time. It really started to get traction, you know, again, with the time frame that you laid out, Mayor Holeen, and, you know, came before after many meetings. I sat through a lot of those as a member of the council, came through the planning commission, and, you know, the committee that worked on it. The planning commission voted on it unanimously, came before us as a council. The 10 of us at that time, including 3 of us in the room here, Councilman Bueller and Mayor Holeen, you were a council member at that time, as well as myself, voted on it unanimously, 10-0. What's interesting is back to the planning commission, that was a unanimous decision as well. And there were some very diverse opinions regarding lake development in general in the personalities in that planning commission. They agreed on what came forward. So I guess where I'm going with my comments tonight is that I'm all in favor of the proposed amendments that are before you right now. I'm all in favor of tweaking, you know, continuing to review that going forward. But I do want to, and you referenced this, Mayor, that as you go through this and look at it further, I want us to keep the basic framework that we have in place as a starting point. I don't want to see us gutting this entire ordinance that an awful lot of time and thought and effort went into it on the part of a lot of people, that I think we've got a pretty good ordinance that came out of it. Does need some revisions, I don't argue that, but as far as gutting the whole thing and starting over, I don't want to see that happen. I don't think, in my opinion, that adding a couple different ordinances regarding one lake versus another, one side of the road versus another, all that is going to do is going to complicate matters and make things more confusing to anybody that might be interested in doing anything around the lake. So I guess I'm in favor of what you got in front of you tonight. I am, you know, encouraged by the approach that you plan on taking in the near future here. But I don't want to see us gutting the whole thing and starting over. If we do that, we're essentially back to where we were more than 5 years ago and starting over from scratch. And for the sake of the citizens of Watertown and the developers that might be interested, that's not fair to anybody, including the homeowners around the lake. It's just not fair that we start from scratch and lend this uncertainty to this whole issue. So I would ask that, again, I support the amendments before you, and again, proceed cautiously as you go forward with this, but I do like the plan that I've heard laid out from you tonight, Mayor. So with that, I will stop my comments tonight and see where we go from here in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, future state senator. It's nice to see you. Any further public hearing?
My name's Ray Feist, and I'm a landowner. And a property across the road from mine on the lake has been considered to be changed from rural to LC. And I'm very concerned about that because we talked about planning 5 years ago or many years ago. And in that, I do think we are forgetting one thing. There's an element here that we haven't looked at. It's all we do is look at maps and paperwork, things like that. But the whole idea of a lake and having a lake cabin is whole different than commercializing land in town. On the lake, we buy those properties, we improve those properties, we deal with those properties because we want to be on the lake. We want to use the lake for swimming, recreation, boating, fishing, and we like the quiet atmosphere of a lake cabin. We allow a lot of commercial to come into these areas. All we're going to have is a town with a lake in it. We're going to miss the point of what a lake and a lake cabin and that is for. From the beginning, all the lakes that I've been familiar with, North and South Dakota, and that, have been held that they are recreational in cabin type sites. And there's very little commercial has been allowed because there are some necessities you need. This lake already has those. We have the Lake Pesca Lodge. We have the prop bar and grill And we have others that are close by. The Sandbar is another one that's on the lake. There's enough of that. The city's golf course has a restaurant, and you can get a beer there if you want to. And it's near one of the ramps. So we have about what we need on the lake, and we don't need a lot of restaurant, bars, and different things like that, because then we're going to have some bad times on the lake. It wasn't more than about 3 or 4 weeks ago, without any heavy traffic or anything, somebody run into my mailbox and knocked it over. I look at that and I say that the more traffic and the more things we get over there, the more of that kind of stuff we're going to see. If it ain't vandalism, it may be incidental, whatever, but that lake should be quiet and be conservative. And that this city itself has protected that lake for a long time. What you can build on it and what kind of structures and all that stuff. And myself has experienced going to get a permit to put a lean-to so I could park my boats under it. And because it had a tin roof and partial siding was tin, I was not allowed to have that park space because it doesn't fit in with the natural surroundings of the area. So if we're going to be protecting that kind of lake atmosphere and everything, then I don't see where commercializing a lot of this land around the lake is going to help us any. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to testify regarding the transition from permissible to conditional and the definitions?
Yes, I'm Doug Modica. I'm also on the Lake Campesco Water Project District. So I've been working years to preserve the lake. Oh. There, okay. Doug Modica. Okay, I'm on the Lake Campesco Water Project District, and I live right next to the neighbors that are asking for this, and they're wonderful neighbors. Colt and JC, their dogs, Jen and Cruz, and little Sully, and their new little boy, Bo. So they're wonderful neighbors, and we live right next to them, and both of us live right across from this very beautiful rural property. We've had neighborhood parties there. Chuck would invite the neighbors to have parties there. It's a wonderful site, beautiful, beautiful site. But I just wanted to bring up two things. Lynn mentioned last time that we pay higher taxes living at the lake, okay? It costs us to live at the lake. He said we were crazy people. You remember his comments last week.
Just make sure to address everyone, Councilman Jurens,
I'm
by
sorry.
the official title. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Councilman Jurens. Okay, I just wanted to mention two things. Could you bring up the list of the permitted and conditional uses that you had up there? Because you can see right away, there's three things that I want to mention.
Director Von
Mentioned
Eyck?
last time. Can you bring that up? On this, okay. First of all, there's a mistake on where it says the boat repair shops. That's a mistake. The service establishments on the top, service establishments are repairs, a repair for automobiles. And we said specifically, no, for permitted uses at the lake, we're only going to allow things that that pertain to the lake. And so we said in the permitted use under service establishments, that's where we could say you could have boat repair shops, only in the permitted for the lake. And you'd have to have a conditional uses for what used to be the car repair shop. So that's a mistake. That's definitely a mistake. The second thing that I brought up.
Excuse me, Mr. Modica. Our city manager, Mac, would like to.
Just a question
something?
for clarity.
Yes.
Are you saying that it's a mistake in the ordinance as written? Or
As amended, as what you tried to amend, you amended it wrong, incorrectly. Because we said permitted use for commercial lake, we would allow boat repairs at the lake, not auto repairs. And that's in the wrong place. It's under conditional. It's in the wrong place. Second of all, I mentioned too, you have contradictions.
Mayor, for me. Sorry.
Director Von Eyck?
Just before it gets buried, I could address that right now if you wish, Mayor.
If you're okay with that, Mr. Modica?
If it doesn't take my time.
No, I mean, I won't
Well, you go ahead.
penalize you for that.
Yeah, so service establishments does not include vehicle or boat repairs. That's for personal services such as beauty salons, parlors, things like that. So vehicle or boat repairs are not included under service establishments. That's why we've now defined and included boat repair shops under conditional uses.
Okay. The second issue is you mentioned right away, you said that when retail and service establishments come in, they have to check on it and make sure that they solve the parking issues. But yet, if you look at conditional, right down there, it says automobile parking lot. So already, you've got a contradiction. In conditional, it says you have to go through conditional to have car parking, but yet Heath actually mentioned that for a service and retail establishment, you have to figure out the amount of parking and so on. There's a contradiction right there.
Mr. Modica?
Yes.
First off, let me remind, and it's not just you, with everyone, it's not Heath, it's Director Von
I'm
Eyck.
sorry, Director
I
Heath.
know. We all know each other, and I know it can get loose, but
Director Heath.
we need to behave by a certain level. But Director Von Eyck, I know, has an answer to the supposed contradiction.
Yes, no, thank you again. So for clarity on that point, the conditional use for automobile parking lot is if that were to function as a standalone use on the parcel. So I'm not going to think of a good example, but there are certain parcels of land where we just want to park cars on. That is completely separate and irrelevant to the amount of parking space a restaurant might need. A restaurant use, based on its seating capacity, will determine the minimum number of parking stalls that restaurant is required in order to sustain its operation. So there are parking regulations for these uses, but to use your lot as a parking lot for whatever reason, that has to be performed only under a conditional use.
Okay, that's confusing. The second thing is, under permitted use, you can have restaurants, and I mentioned this last time, but yet under conditional use, you have bar or tavern. They both have parking lots, they both have traffic, they both, and I hate to say, what's the difference? By the way, I'm a director at the Lake Campesco Water Project District. You can address me as Director Modica if you'd like.
I can.
Okay. All right. So would you just explain what's the
Director
difference
Modica,
between
we can address that.
Thank you.
Absolutely, not a problem. So restaurants have their own defined use. It's an establishment providing food services to patrons where food and/or drink is ordered and consumed on the premises, taken out or delivered to the customer's location. Now, the bar and tavern, they have their completely separate definition in the ordinance. And as you can imagine, that's related to holding a liquor license and serving alcohol on the premises. So they're defined completely separately. That's why their uses are listed separately. One under permitted, you can have a restaurant that doesn't serve alcohol, but you cannot have a restaurant that serves alcohol without that bar tavern conditional use.
Okay, when you said service and drink did not include alcohol
Correct.
at a restaurant.
Not according to state statute or ordinances. You can't just open a restaurant and serve alcohol without the proper licensing and conditional uses from the city. That's why
okay.
the bar tavern is defined separately to include that as a conditional use within a restaurant or a standalone function if they desire.
So a bar and tavern can only serve alcohol, they can't serve any food?
No, they can serve food too,
Oh, well,
but not without that conditional use.
okay, understood. Okay, now a second thing is wetlands that I just want to mention. Whether it's a wetland or not, as mentioned, even if it is a wetland, if you can offset the wetland, you can say, if I get permission, I can fill in a wetland as long as I offset it and come up with the same amount of wetland somewhere else. Is that not true?
There is a wetland bank that the Corps of Engineers administers, and that is completely determination at the federal level whether they would deem that appropriate or not. What they would assess is the location and functionality of a wetland and whether they deem it appropriate to trade that wetland space out for wetland space in another area. But completely a decision based at the federal level through the Corps of Engineers. They manage the wetland bank program nationwide and would administer it here for any considerations of using that wetland bank around Lake Kempesca.
Okay, so what Director Danforth mentioned is if you don't know it's a wetland, they could do whatever they want. If it is a wetland, it could still be offset, could still be taken with permission. Okay, and my last point is this, is if the property is sold. Now, as I mentioned, we know our neighbors, and they want to have a storage unit behind the trees, off-site, away from view of the public. That's wonderful. And they want to have, they were married there. And we'd like to have neighborhood parties and get-togethers there. We love that. That's what we want. And that's fine. You know, that's great. They can have their storage unit there. But the question is, if that property is ever sold, they'll have to do a conditional use there for storage units. That got moved down from storage shop. So now they have to go to a conditional. That means that if they do the conditional, okay, that's the only thing that they want and have there. However, if it's ever sold, it's still wide open now for that they never planned on it. For retail establishments, service establishments, we can have a restaurant across the road. By the way, both of us are across the street from this beautiful rural property, but it could all, if that's ever sold, that could be turned into any of those other things. We could have a restaurant across from us. You know, we could have any sort of a business across from us. And that's the main fear that we have, and that was mentioned, that if the property is sold. The only solution to this, and the simplest one, that's not going to take a lot of work, is just make everything conditional. That means that our neighbors would say, we want to have storage units back behind the trees there. That's fine. But if anybody buys that property, they've got to start all over again, come back, get permission to put in whatever they want, whatever they want. And that's fine. They start over from scratch. But if we do it the way we do it, without everything being conditional, that means that anybody that says that's the one thing I want and it's sold, that means that it's wide open. No, there's no hearings. I just heard that tonight. There will be no hearings. They can come in and do whatever they want with that property after it's sold. And that's what concerns us the most, is that we could have a restaurant right across the street from us, and they could tear down, you know, they do it, well, get permission, do whatever they want, fill in the land, and that's the biggest fear. The simplest solution, make everything conditional. And they get one thing that, well, one or two things that they want. That's fine. We'll agree to it. And then if it's sold, start all over again. Is that correct? And
excuse me, Director. I mean, I'll allow it. Go ahead.
Just within the confines of the ordinance, you know, they can't do whatever they want. They can only do what's in the confines of the ordinance.
But the ordinance is permitted uses of things that the neighbors never wanted. That's my point.
Okay.
And I'll.
Okay. Anyone else like to testify on this item? Okay, I will close the public hearing, open it up for council action. Do I have a motion to approve the amendment or amendments? Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Schutte. We are going to open it up for council discussion and or questions related specifically to what is in this ordinance, not necessarily what is not in this ordinance, if you get what I mean. We're trying to take a step forward here, and we've already agreed, and I have already stated that we are going to take more steps forward. So we are not going to discuss what this amendment, what this agenda item is not. We are going to discuss what it is, and that is what is in it currently. Understood, council? Any discussion? Councilman Jurens.
Thank you, Mayor. There's been some change since the last 8, 10, 15 years, or 3 years since this ordinance was put in place. I've had the opportunity to hear from and go out and call between 40 and 50 people in that area. Their thoughts are this ordinance goes too far. Doug just mentioned it. He mentioned the restaurant.
Director Monica.
I like you, Mayor.
Excuse me, Councilman.
There's another one that gets added in there more often than a restaurant, and that's a campground. That is really, really at the edge of a lot of conversations that I've had. They bring it up, I bring it up, and you know, you get into some developments that have happened that I consider have been very responsible in the last 8 to 10 years. And there's one on the west side of the lake along what we used to call Old South Dakota Highway 139. But it was the Munger development. That went through a PUD. I was in this chamber for all of his steps in getting that done. He stood there, asked, what would you like to have accomplished? How do you want the siding to look? How do you want the roof to look? How do you want the soffit to look? How do you want the fascia to look? And where do you want your trees? And he did it. And he goes, the city of Watertown wasn't a pain about it. It went through fine. So there's ways of getting development done. There's ways of saying, hey, can we call a special meeting to get things done quicker? There's ways of getting things done, but it was an example that kept coming up in the eyes and in the conversations was, here's a good, responsible development that was done with a PUD, and a lot of people are asking that in their comments, in their emails, and what I've been hearing. So when it comes to throwing a conditional use, or a permitted use down into the conditional use, I'm not sure that campgrounds are going far enough to be guardrailed. And I'm really questioning whether that we want something that looks like some of the campgrounds around a few of the lakes that we have seen right here in eastern South Dakota, and been fortunate to travel around the country chasing a fish here and there, and have seen where these things can go awry. And the citizens of Watertown, I don't feel deserve that. And I know there's not a lake person out there that would like to see that. So I'm going to ask the open-ended question. Would that be able to happen if we vote yes on this tonight, if there's no further changes done to this ordinance?
Councilman, if you would like to ask that question right now, it would count against your time for your first speech.
I'm good with that.
Okay. The question I will first send to City Manager Mack. Councilman, could you please repeat the question?
Yeah, do our current ordinance changes, moving the campgrounds from a permitted use, which would have been a wild, wild west opportunity, by moving those down to conditional use, does that change anything in the ability to get a campground through in the future on Lake Compesca or just off the road on Lake Compesca? And when I say wild, wild west, I could give you some examples of some campgrounds that have had conversations with people about, but I'd just soon not leave those lakes with a bad eye here tonight.
City Manager Mack, would you like to answer that or direct it to someone else?
Well, I will attempt, and then my team can jump in if I'm missing anything. So, first, as it relates to the Wild Wild West, I would speculate that their zoning regulations are likely different than ours. So there's not a true apples to apples comparison on what they might allow at their lake versus what we allow, our building permits, things like that. To your second question, so if these ordinance amendments are approved this evening, a campground would then be allowed through the conditional use process, meaning the applicant would have to take that request to the Board of Adjustment, which is a quasi-judicial board. So any decision they make has to be appealed through the courts process, not to an elected body. And during the course of that discussion on the conditional use, the Board of Adjustment can place additional conditions on it. So they could say, you're only allowed so many camp spots. They have to be, this much more stringent in size than what the campground definition allows for. You have to put up additional screening than what our typical development regulations would call for. And often, those conditions that are placed on conditional uses are driven by the board discussion as well as input from neighbors of the site. So short answer, yes, a campground could still happen. Longer answer is it's much more complicated than just allowing it to happen through a permitted use. Does that answer your question?
Councilman Jurgens, are you satisfied with that answer, or would you like to go on? The floor is still yours.
Can I have a follow-up?
You can.
All right. So the conditional use, if I'm hearing it correctly, is permitted through, that may be the wrong word, is allowed through an unelected board versus an elected board. Is that all the further it needs to go is through an unelected planning commission, board of adjustments?
So Board of Adjustment, and this is where our attorney and Public Works Director could chime in with some additional information. So the Boards of Adjustment are granted different authorities through state statute that governs how they operate as a body. So yes, they are unelected. The only elected board that the city has is the city council. But they are vested with additional responsibilities and requirements on them that our other volunteer unelected boards are not. I don't know if Director Von Eye probably can clean that up a little bit for me.
Councilman Jurgens, if you would like Director Von Eye to continue answering the question, you can. The floor is still yours for a short period of time.
Yeah, really, it's, what my question is getting at is, are unelected officials making those decisions to get through a court or to get through the conditional use versus an elected group of officials? Just one more guardrail.
Councilman, is that a question that you would like answered?
Yeah, if
City Manager Mack, would you like to answer it or direct it to somewhere else?
I think I know the answer, but I want to say it and be completely wrong, so I'm going to defer to the right side of the room.
But really, my answer pertains to all three questions that were just asked is, and I want to emphasize and remind the council that, and the public for that matter, we also have a section of our zoning ordinance 2176, and we'll actually be looking at it here after this action, regarding campgrounds. And in that, I think addresses a lot of Councilman Jurgens' concerns where we have the design criteria listed on what a campground needs to look like in the city of Watertown. So the concerns of, and I think I can probably guess some of the campgrounds you're referring to, that won't happen here because we have Chapter 2176 that addresses what campgrounds have to look like. So in order to get there, though, you're right. The Board of Adjustment has to approve that conditional use, but there are other guardrails subsequent to that that they have to stay within, if that makes sense.
yeah, it does.
Councilman?
How much time do I have left?
About 1 minute.
All right. That brings the subject of creating tiny home towns. I don't know if you want to call them, well, mobile home parks are not allowed in these new definitions. Actually, they never have been. And the tiny home situation keeps coming up because we are seeing the start of a new tiny home campground. And in my work and in my career work, we define mobile homes a lot different than what I heard at the last city council meeting. And Councilman Danforth did refer to it. He goes, there's somebody in here that works in that industry, and, well, I'm the guy. And when they set tiny homes, it sure reminds me of a mobile home. But I don't know where we got that definition. So that has been some of the concern also, is that the campground is now a 100-lot tiny home town. And where do we want this in this city or around the lake? So maybe clarify more on this. And if we're going to get to that, I'm fine with that, but we're on campground, so.
That would bring your time to an end if you were
Thank
okay
you.
with that.
I'm good.
Okay. And I would like to thank the councilman. We're following even stricter rules on Robert's rules. According to Robert's rules, each person on the council is allowed to speak 2 times to any one item, but they are also allowed to ask questions. And so the policy, according to Robert's rules and how I'm going to be enforcing it, is you can speak. You can also ask questions independently from that. So if Councilman Jurgens wanted to ask those questions independently and just as a one-off, but then offer no commentary or his own personal views on that, that would not have counted against him. That would have been just inquiring for more information. But as he chose to make it as part of his speech and offer commentary to the answers, that counted as his speech. So it was a good example of how we're moving forward, and I thank the councilman for being our guinea pig on that. So, is there anyone else who would like to ask a question or speak for the first time on this? Yes, Councilman?
Are we addressing the campground?
We can, the campground.
Either like we've done in the past, or what are we doing there?
Well, the campground issue, as long as if you're opposed to it being moved to conditional uses, this is just to discuss the definition of a campground and also moving it from permitted to conditional.
Okay, so not the requirements that we have that were changed in the ordinance. So is that coming up on?
I'm going to allow some leniency to that. I want you to get to the satisfaction.
Okay, because I don't want to be a hypocrite. That's the last thing I want to do. I don't think any one of us want to be a hypocrite. But I sat in on the Plan Commission meeting, and there was a lot of discussion about what the requirements were going to be within campgrounds. And, which was interesting, but there were a number of them that you couldn't help but sit back and listen to and wonder, why are we worried about that? Meaning the city. Why are we doing that? So, Mayor, I sent you and City Manager and Mr. Von Eye an email today with a number of questions. And have you had the opportunity to take a look at those? And could you do the same scenario there as what you did with your questions that you accumulated?
Were you not? We can answer them now if you would like.
To me, they're relevant because we're coming down, the whole issue of campgrounds, period. I've heard from people. I have heard concerns. I think people are confused right now, and I think they're worried because we said there can't be any manufactured homes on there, but by definition, now we've got these little homes or whatever they're called. People are concerned with that. They're going, what are we actually allowing and why? But there were a number of questions on just general requirements. And to me, they're good questions to have and at least have discussion or answers on about what we're requiring of these individuals that are these people that are trying to make a business out of a campground. And so you all have my questions if you wanted to take them and address them, if you would, please.
Councilman, if you would like to continue speaking, I would allow that now. Actually, and I thank you also for this opportunity. This is a good example. Getting the questions in ahead of time is also one of the things that we hope that this inspires among the council, so that the questions can be thoroughly researched and that the staff can make certain that they're giving us the proper information. And that was one of the reasons why for the change as well. But I understand that this is kind of thrust upon us at the last moment, so I will provide some leniency on that and allow your questions to be answered at this time, if you would like to. Director Von Eye, do you have a list of those questions?
Yes, I do, Mayor, Councilman Danforth. Thanks for that. So not directly under this action item, but 2 items down the agenda are these amendments related to campgrounds that I referred to just a little bit ago in helping address some Councilman Jurgens' questions. Campgrounds has its own section of the city ordinance, and it litigates exactly what needs to be in a campground, at least from the regulations that the city's been concerned with to date. And so in that, we've redlined a few of these items that, again, will take formal action on a couple items from now. But in the meantime, some of the questions that Councilman Danforth posed earlier today, let's see if I can paraphrase them here briefly and touch on some of the answers I had drafted. Regarding the material of the roadways, the current ordinance requires that campgrounds have a hard surfaced or paved roadway, meaning the main loop through the campground is supposed to be paved. I assume that's just general orderly development that we require and like to see our development have that paving throughout town. We require that for all access and parking requirements for residential, commercial, industrial uses. With one exception, I believe we allow for overflow areas and industrial areas to be gravel surfaced. So what we did in these red lines under the amended campground ordinance is we reduced that requirement. We said, okay, they don't have to be paved. We've all been to campgrounds where many of them don't have paved loops. But we did put in the requirement for crushed asphalt or concrete in order to have a sound level of driving surface, not only for the users of the campground, but also for emergency responders in order to get a fire truck, an ambulance, things like that into a campground. So we actually lessened the requirements in that case. And the other part of that question is, sorry, reading while I'm answering. Or related to that question, I should say, is does City Park comply with the standards and requirements called out in this proposed language? My answer to that is I don't know with certainty, but I would doubt that it complies with all these requirements. It most probably doesn't, most likely doesn't. These requirements, though, I wanted to know, they would be applied to new development, any redevelopment that triggers the requirements. So our ordinance allows for the extension of non-conforming uses, and we would follow those ordinances in that realm. You know, if somebody has a non-conforming campground and they want to expand it, we as staff would administratively allow that through the permitting process so long as it meets those criteria in the non-conforming use section of our ordinance. So no, I don't believe the city campground would meet all these requirements as it is right now today, but I'm guessing it's probably pretty close. I know some of the loops and roads are paved. I believe other ones are an aggregate-based surfacing, but I don't believe it's all paved, nor is it all crushed asphalt or all crushed concrete.
It's your speech, so. The question that Councilman Danforth asked is, can he ask questions intermittently? You can, as long as it counts as your speech. Otherwise, I would ask you to end your speech and ask the questions individually and not offer commentary. The question would be like, but, so it's still your floor, so go ahead.
All right, I'm going to read through it myself here. Okay, so again, I want to go through it because one of my concerns is we have several of these properties in our community now. So one of my questions was, what happens? Is there anything that triggers them to bring their campgrounds up to compliance with all the requirements? That's one trigger, or one question. I went through City Park today. I think, Mr. Van Eye, you are correct. The internal roads are all probably asphalt. The pads are not. Matter of fact, on the original side of the campground, they're just dirt and pebbles is what they are. There's no hard surfaces there whatsoever in any of the pads. But yet we're going to require those things. Anybody else that's going to come in and do a new campground. So my question there is, when do we bring ours up to snuff so that we're playing on the same field as that developer, whoever that is? Then one of my questions was, which was unclear to me, is it says that one of the requirements is that they have sewer system. Does that mean each individual campsite, or does it mean they have to have a dump station on site? So that's a question. Because we have a dump site, we don't have sewer hookups at each station as a city. Then the question about the 2,000 square feet of required per camp site. And that one's confusing to me as to what its purpose is. You know, is it a density issue so that we want to keep things apart? Is it a safety issue? I know down south at Ponset here a couple years ago, they had propane fire and that created a problem and everything was all condensed in there. So really, what's the purpose? And are we really, just by simply having a 2,000 square foot requirement, is that really meeting our objective? I don't know that, because 2,000 feet can be defined in a lot of ways. It could be 10 feet wide by 200 feet, or it could be 50 by 40. And those are different when it comes to proximity to neighboring campsites. So the question there is, what are we actually requiring in that scenario? That's the majority of the questions. And then, like I said, then what triggers us to update ours and so that we comply like we're asking new campground people to comply with?
Councilman, I'll make sure that those questions are answered, but you still have the floor if you would like to make further comments. All right. Director Von Eye, we have a series of questions. I don't know if you are writing them down. I have them down here as well. Would you like to start with the first one first or the last one?
No, I do have them here.
Okay.
Mayor, if you like.
Then please read them off first so that everyone knows what question you are answering, and then go ahead and answer it, except City Manager Mack. Would you like to answer them or have your director?
I'll have Director Von Eye answer them.
Thank you, Mayor, Manager Matt, Councilman Danforth. All good questions, all good discussion. If a campground exists today, what are the triggers or situations that would require them to bring their campground up to code? That was where I believe we left off, Councilman Danforth. And the answer to that is Chapter 21.0402. That is the aforementioned section of code that talks about existing nonconformities. And that allows for the existence and enlargement of nonconforming uses. And the reason that section of the zoning ordinance exists is because the day we pass these zoning ordinances, you can imagine not everything was in compliance. We created zoning districts, we defined their uses, we defined their criteria they could exist in. And the day we passed this ordinance, however many decades ago it was, we had a lot of nonconformities. And then subsequent to that, we've adopted new chapters of ordinance where we create nonconformities, things that simply don't comply as they are today. So that chapter allows for those to continue to exist and also allows for the expansion of them under certain criteria. Let's see. The only thing, the example I could think of that would require us to initiate meeting or any campground that's non-conforming to meeting today's requirements would be a substantial change if that were to occur, and if the uses were to change. Let's say something's not a campground, but they want to change the use to a campground, they'd obviously have to follow the new ordinance. If there's a substantial change, which I believe is only defined in our floodplain ordinance and could probably be expanded on in several other areas of ordinance, but if there's a substantial change to the property, that could also trigger it being brought up to date to the current city code as well. But other than that, it can continue to exist as is, where is, and even expand to some degree. The next one, does the reference to sewer requirements mean that each campsite is required to have a sewer connection or just a dump station? The answer to that is that either or. Campgrounds can have full service hookups and individual service connections, or they can have a general dump site that's meant for the use of the campground as a whole, but it can't be a dry facility without either, is what that is referring to there. The 2,000 square foot requirement, that was actually the existing square footage requirement. Staff had recommended a lower square footage requirement down to 1,500, just from doing some regional research and other campground ordinances. Planning Commission actually recommended that be increased back up and left at the 2,000 square foot per campground. The reason that's there is it's the space for each campsite, which would include the camper pad where the camper actually parks, picnic table, green space around the camper. That 2,000 square feet encompasses all that. That sizing then drives the density of the campground or the number of campsites per acres of campground. And it's really a multifunctional regulation where it's could be considered part safety, but also part density, where we don't want things crammed in there too tightly based on that use in our community. It could create less than desirable campground conditions like we talked about earlier if your density is so high and you've got several campers crammed into an area. That larger square footage gives a little bit more breathing room, a little bit more aesthetically pleasing campground style. And so that's where that 2,000 square feet comes from. There is also a safety component to that in the NFIP, the fire code that we haven't formally adopted, but we sometimes reference because the fire code we do adopt doesn't have the same amount of information in it, so we'll use it as a reference. They do recommend a 10-foot spacing between temporary structures in a campground, so there is some relation to safety component there. And along with that same question, the 2,000 square foot is, why is that requirement there? My best answer is industry standards, and then a common arrangement for the comfort of the users, the aesthetics of the campground, and then that safety component all mixed in is why that 2,000 square feet per campground is included. I think I covered all the questions there. If not, please speak up.
All right. If he missed one, you can ask one. Is there a councilman who would like to speak for the first time or ask a question? Councilman Bueller?
Thank you, Mayor. First off, if I could ask Community Development Manager Hanton to come back to the mic. I have a question for you.
I will direct all questions through the chair to city manager, but probably will end up with you, Manager Hanton.
Okie dokie. Just a quick question. The definitions that we've had recently, have they changed, especially retail establishment and service establishment? Have those changed at all recently?
City Manager Mack, are you okay with seating Manager Hanton?
So those are two of the proposed amendments for the definitions. And for retail establishment, we struck the auto body repair shop. And then because auto body repair shops are defined individually, and then that's also why we created the definition of the boat repair shop. And then the service establishment, that was just a cleanup. It's the same thing. We added an additional example and then also just changed the wording because it was a little redundant. It still kind of is because it's hard to describe. So, but that's a standard definition for a service establishment in zoning ordinances.
Then also, if I could follow up, question regarding we have convenience stores, petroleum sales, and repair shops still in that definition under retail establishments. Is that correct? Is that still a part of that?
No, repair shops should be stricken.
But we still would have petroleum sales and convenience stores.
Yes.
Okay. Well, all right.
You still have the floor.
Good deal. No, I guess what I would propose, I understand that we are looking at spending a bunch of time trying to rework this whole ordinance, but I honestly believe, after looking at this, and of course being a part of a lot of these discussions over the years, I think if we, in my opinion, obviously the campground thing needs to be ironed out. I think that's great. But I would propose that we could pretty much take care of this thing by moving retail establishments and service establishments to conditional uses. That's my opinion. Now, perhaps, and I'll go through the city manager, perhaps a community development manager, Hanton, would like to rebut that.
City Manager Mack, would you like to address that or pass it off?
Well, I don't know that there's anything that needs to be rebutted about that. I just texted our attorney for an opinion, but I am not certain that an amendment like that wouldn't have to go back through the Plan Commission.
I would, if I might, I think it probably would, but to me, I think we save ourselves a whole lot of time and just put those in conditional uses and let our planning commission, let our Board of Adjustments make the decision as to whether or not they want to allow those in the CL. That's my opinion. And I just have one other comment, if I might, and that is on campgrounds. One of them is, I know we do this at City Park, we allow folks to double up. What are the conditions in that regard for people doubling up on camper pads?
City Manager Mack, where would you like to direct that?
Well, I would assume that a condition like that would be up to the Board of Adjustment to determine what that would look like. I don't, we may have some specific regulations, because he's making a face at me, so I got the answer wrong.
Director Von Eye?
No, I was just actually, that's more of an operational function. I'm looking around the room for Dusty, but the campground manager would manage or administer whatever people are doing on their campsites during their operations.
So it would be the, sorry.
Councilman Beeler, the floor is still yours.
Thank you. All right, Director Von Eye, that would then be the campground director, the owner of the campground, correct? So that would be a private owner of that campground. So they would have that opportunity. So we've changed the square footage, but then we may say that he could allow, or she could allow, them to have 2 campers on the same pad.
Yeah, theoretically, I think that you could see that. It's simply nothing that the city would actively go out and police. You can imagine the headache that would bring with an administrative standpoint. So if a campground host happens to let an occasional camp space double up, I guess I could foresee that potentially happening, yeah.
You know, and that may be something that we would want to address in the ordinance, as a part of the ordinance, to allow one specific dwelling or camper. Something to consider. That's all I have. Thank you.
Councilman, the floor is still yours, though, if you wanted to comment.
Well, no, I just, when I look at this, I look at the main things I'm looking at is protecting the residences that are currently there and allowing, appropriate commercial development. And we can do that. And I think we need to be able to trust the folks that we have in our community that serve on that board, on the Planning Commission as well as Board of Adjustments, to help make those decisions. And again, anytime anybody wants to do any of these things, they first have to come and get that designation. They have to get that zoning designation to begin with. But I think I honestly believe we move retail establishments, service establishments to conditional uses, I think we got this thing covered, in my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman.
Mayor,
You don't have to say anything. If you would like
Manager
to.
Mack, do you mind if I do? Was that a yes? Oh, okay. So the only reason with moving the service establishment and retail establishment down from permitted to conditional is that's inconsistent with all the other commercial districts. Both of those uses are permitted in all other commercial districts.
If you have a question, you can ask it. Otherwise, if you're going to comment, it's going to count. I'll give some leniency, as I know this is our first night, but go ahead, Councilman.
Okay, I'd like to address that. I think this is definitely different. It's lake, it's commercial lake. It's not everywhere else, it's commercial lake. And I think that designation should allow us to make that council. I think we should be able to do that. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Is there another councilman who would like to speak? Councilman Shetty, do you want to ask a question or speak?
Speak.
Councilman Shetty, take it away.
Ready, go. All right, thank you, Mayor. Well, the apartments, we haven't touched on that too much, but I appreciate the apartments being moved down as well, because when we started this process a few months back, that was one of the items that I felt was sensitive to, as far as being a lake owner back in the day and where to put apartments. So being in the conditional use, I appreciate Public Works Director Von Eye, your comments earlier about really laying out all the, answering questions and laying out everything here when it comes to apartments even. We have some checks and balances in play as far as even the infrastructure, the wastewater, things like that, that'll address potentially some of the concerns with lift stations, things like that. Let's just say if an apartment building were to go in. So I appreciate the direction we're going here with this, the campgrounds. That's a good conversation as well. But also I just wanted to thank Community Development Manager Hanton and others who are putting a lot of work into this to get us to this point, and Planning Commission as well. So I just appreciate the direction we're going, but I'm also looking forward to what else we may do down the road.
Thank you. Is there another councilman who would like to speak for the first time or ask a question? I guess I am considered a councilman, so I will speak for the first time. I just want to state that in regard to this item in particular, which its main goal is to switch 3 things, campground, storage units, and apartments, from permitted to conditional. That was done because that was specifically, these were the biggest, particularly apartments, were the biggest concern that people, residents at the lake had, that they did not want to see apartments there. So moving apartments from permitted uses to conditional at least gives a level of protection to the residents that was before not allowed. I think that everyone can agree that that is a good change, for example. The question is, does this go far enough, fast enough? That's the question. And I would just say, at least for the first time, we've gone somewhere. Before tonight, we haven't even gone somewhere. We haven't even taken a step to correct it. This is at least something concrete that we can vote on that improves the CL district. And that's what this was brought forward with. That was the process that I asked for, is just to get something concrete that we can bring to a vote that would then spur the further conversation to hopefully get the CL zoning where it is something that we can all live with as a community. That was the intent that I had. Now, whether or not it plays out that way, I'm not sure. But as far as this item tonight goes, I think that most of us are in agreement that changing these from permitted to conditional uses is a good change. And it's a good first step. And that's what I hope that we will take tonight. And that's why I will be voting yes. Is there anyone else who would like to speak or ask a question? Councilman Jerns, would you like to speak for your second time?
Absolutely. I will be voting no tonight on this, and it's because of the tiny home camper situation. Now knowing that tiny homes are allowed in campgrounds around Lake Pesca, I believe that brings a separate set of issues concerning the permanency of those versus motor homes and fifth wheels and travel trailers. The permanency is, now we got decks, now we have lights hanging, now we have decorations. Just go around the lakes and you will see it. The permanency brings different things to this. It brings a mobile home style of living. They can even live in those in the winter, by the way. And for a real bargain, they can live in those for the winter. So they look like a home, they look like a mobile home, they act like a mobile home, and I don't think we're going to get much changing done to this definition tonight to change. And by the way, for those campgrounds that are already in place, we heard from Von Eye earlier, Director Von Eye earlier, that those that have their zoning are not subject to this, only new stuff coming forward. And listening to a large majority of the lake residents, they believe there are enough campgrounds around Lake Kempesca. And if you want me to mention off all of the names and all the places you can go, and the 2 that are upcoming, that are in the process of being built, they've seen enough. Over to you.
Councilman Peters.
I respect Councilman Jerns' position on this. I am going to vote yes tonight, because if we don't take baby steps to get to the end goal, we're not getting anywhere. So I'm going to be voting yes tonight, because if we don't accept the changes that we have in front of us right now, no resident is protected tomorrow. So we need to accept these today, and we can certainly move down the path of correcting these and amending these and adding tiny homes and adding, Councilman Bueller's comments as well in the future if we deem that appropriate. But if we don't take baby steps now, we're going to find ourselves with packed council chambers every single time a permit gets dropped. So I'm going to be voting yes tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. Is there any other councilman who would like to speak first time or ask a question? I will speak my second time and say I also respect the councilman from Ward E. I thank him and I understand completely his concerns. I would like to just say that I have been taking notes and I know that we will watch this again. All of these ideas that have been brought forward tonight for improvements will be brought forward at that special council meeting, including the tiny homes, including what Director Monica says is moving everything to conditional uses. I would like to suggest that all conditional uses in CL we should at least consider that all conditional uses at CL must go before the city council, an elected official. I'm saying, and I know that there's those steps. I'm not saying that, I know that there's a lot of steps, but I want at least to consider that as a possibility. And I'm not proposing it now, I'm just spouting off, we're not, the disgust in the, no.
I was going to provide a clarification for this earlier, but state statute requires that we
Yes.
have a Board of Adjustment and that they hear conditional uses.
Yes.
That's why it doesn't come to the council.
Yes. And I know, and that's why I said that I know that it would require some level of change if it at all can be done, but I wanted to at least explore that as a possibility. And, well, now that you threw me off. But I will be voting yes. Councilman Peters explained it very well. Let's say if we don't vote yes on these amendments and then we do end up voting yes on the annexation later, then there's no protection for the residents. This at least starts giving protection and starts us down the right path, and we will not end here. Is there anyone else who would like to speak a second time? All right. Councilman Danforth.
I have nightmares about this CL thing. I lose sleep over it. Because it does mean a lot to me, because I see a lot of good that can come from this. But I also see a lot of harm and damage that can come from this, because the decisions that we make are long-term decisions. You know, and we're gonna deal with an annexation and zoning a little bit later on, and, you know, some of these things that we deal with, when we make this decision, it's 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road, and things can happen. And so it's not just what we deal with today. But I'm absolutely confident that there's a lot of progress that we can make on this. And we need to make on this, and I hope the process that's going to get used is going to get us there. I told the Plan Commission I wasn't sure if I wanted them to agree to passing anything or updating anything or not. And Councilman Peters said it very well, and that is, if we don't do this tonight on the items that are in front of us, then we haven't moved the ball, and if something comes before us, then we aren't accepting some of those protections, where they're gonna stay as is. So I'm gonna vote for this with the confidence and the trust that we are gonna move forward as a council in dealing with the language much, much further than where we are today. I have heard from a lot of people in regards to this ordinance, and there's a lot more concerns than there are positive things out there. I will promise you that. So I'm with Councilman Peters. It was a good explanation. At this point, we got to take a baby step, and that step is better than nothing. And so that's where I'll be at on this one as well.
Thank you. Final call for comments. Question is to approve the amendment. All those in favor will say yes, opposed nay. Finance Officer Bob Zine, please call the roll.
Okay. Tupper,
Yes.
Bueller,
Yes.
Danforth,
Yes.
Helene,
Yes.
Jurens,
No.
Peters,
Yes.
Shuddy.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Now we're moving on to item D, a second reading of an ordinance, zone text amendment to Chapter 21.90, definitions of Title 21 zoning of the revised ordinances of the City of Watertown. Director Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. This is in connection to the previous action that was just taken. This is to update a handful of the definitions. There are several definitions in Chapter 21, the zoning code for the city. One of them you'll see, as I've shared to my screen here, is the definition of an apartment. We've clarified through reference what exactly that entails. The previous definition was very vague to where any residential unit essentially was considered an apartment. So we've expanded on that definition to what the standard intent and use of an apartment would actually be. We've added a definition for boat repair shops, as discussed earlier. That was one of the inclusions in the conditional use. For caretaker's residence, we've talked about that in here because of how it's used in the campground ordinance and what's allowed for a caretaker's residence. That was also a longstanding just cleanup definition that we needed to address anyway, regarding whether families could live there or not, and we've struck in that language from the definition. Retail establishments, as Ms. Hanton mentioned earlier, that repair shops was struck from there, so that a retail establishment could not be a repair shop or include that use. Service establishments is defined again as providing services to the public rather than selling goods, and then it also gives some similar examples that we cited earlier. Laundry, hair, salon, barber shop, things of that nature. Those are the definitions, a few fairly minor, I would say, that are correlated to the CL amendments we just passed, and also a little bit correlating to the next action item on the agenda tonight. I'll stand by for questions.
Thank you very much. I'll open up a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to testify on this item? I'll close the public hearing and open it up for council action. Do I have a motion to approve the amendment? Motion made by Councilman Schutte. Seconded by Councilman Peters. Let's open it up for discussion. Is there anyone who would like to speak on this item? I'll just start it off and say thank you, Director Von Eye, for explaining that. This is, as with all of these 4 topics on today's agenda, these all kind of touch upon one another, and that allowed for some crossing when we're discussing it, because it is all one large zoning amendment that we are talking about, but we are taking them individually. This is also one that I think we can all get behind, because the stricter that you define something, the better you understand what can and cannot go into a specific zoning request. And I think that is a very good step and something that we will continue to be doing. Is there anyone else who would like to discuss on this? The motion is to accept the amendment or approve the amendment. All those in favor will say aye or nay. Please call the roll.
Tupper?
Aye.
Bueller?
Aye.
Danforth?
Aye.
Moline? Aye. Jurens?
Aye.
Peters?
Aye.
Schutte?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. We're on to item E, a second reading of an ordinance, a zoning text amendment to Chapter 21.76, campgrounds of the revised ordinances of the City of Watertown. Director Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. This is the third and final consideration regarding these ordinances, all linked to the CL. But as discussed earlier, we've touched on the campground section. Again, this is its own section of Chapter 21. Lays out all the requirements for a campground within the city limits. The red lines here are what's being proposed to be amended. One that we talked about earlier, the surfacing requirement, we've backed that down from having to be paved and lessened that requirement to crushed concrete or recycled asphalt type of material, or a similar all-weather surface material as approved by the city engineer. This caveat is normal because there's other materials that could create the same functionality of crushed concrete or recycled asphalt, such as Class 5 aggregate that's a specifically crushed and graded aggregate that would essentially meet the same function and provide the same load carrying capacity for emergency response vehicles. Other ancillary changes, as you can see throughout here, talks about the campground host and one dwelling unit being permitted for a campground host. and no mobile homes shall be allowed on campsites. To that note, I would like to get together with Councilman Jurens outside this meeting and talk in detail about the tiny homes mentality. I'll briefly touch on that just for context tonight, because I think it's important. The way those particular homes that have been hauled in on a campground in town are classified by the, I forget the name of the organization, but the people that classify buildings and structures, they do deem those as recreational vehicles, such as, which would be equivalent classification as a camper. So I wanted to point that out, and then also their use would be restricted by Chapter 2176, this chapter right here, which limits any campsite from being occupied for more than 180 days. So those same camper regulations would apply to these, what look like mini homes, because we're treating them as campers, so they follow the same rules as a camper would. But again, we'd be glad to talk through that in any level of detail with any of the council members that would like to outside this meeting. Screening, we touch on in here, and there are some record requests being made available to the city by the campground host if required upon them. That includes all the changes for the campground section, Mayor.
Thank you. I will open up a public hearing. Is there anyone who would like to testify on this item? Is there anyone else, anyone who would like to testify on this item?
Ray Feist again. I just have a question. If they have to remove 180 days, how long do they have to be gone before they can come back and take the site over again?
I will direct that question to our city manager, Mac. Director Von Eye?
Yeah.
I will defer to our lovely city attorney sitting next to me.
Not to complicate things. So it's in any calendar year. So basically, let's say that their 180 days ran up into the end of December, then yes, they'd be in a new calendar year. So they could do it January through June. Or no, what is it? Sorry that I'm not doing my math correctly. Is that 6 months, right? 180, yeah. So yes, theoretically they could be there, and then they'd have to be gone for the remainder of that calendar year. So let's say in 2024, if they were there January through June, they'd have to leave, and they couldn't come back until January the following year. Now, the other thing to remember too is just, like I said, it's just the reality of the situation. So normally our long-term campers are usually snowbirds. They're coming here in the summer, and they're going to Arizona in the winter. So that's the only other, I guess, practical comment I would make.
And Mr. Feist, thank you. And any further public hearing? Close public hearing, open it up for council action. Do I have a motion to approve the amendment? Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Peters. Let's open it up, discussion on this. Councilman Tupper.
This is going to kind of cover everything that we've covered with C, D, and E. It's 6 years on the council. There's been a lot of very difficult decisions that have come in front of us. Or, some people have been there way longer than me. This is probably one of the more controversial items. And I've, heard from a lot of people in the public. I've heard from a lot of people at City Hall. I've also heard from a lot of the other councilmen. All great points. But somebody just mentioned not too long ago taking baby steps. I don't know if I'd call them baby steps. I still think they're quite large steps that we're taking this evening, with a lot of discussion, a lot of good feedback from the public. I'm not one for liking to see kicking a can down the road, which in government that seems to happen quite often. So I am looking forward to getting this out of the way. I am looking forward to working in November, December, whenever we do, to look at this whole Lake District as a whole, as a council. I think a lot of great things are going to come out of it. And the goal of the whole thing is to protect the majority of the city, not only lake residents. I live in town. The lake is actually just as much mine as anybody's. And when I want to go out and enjoy it, I also want to go out and enjoy it. I don't pay the taxes that you guys do, but that's my choice, I guess. So, but it is part of Watertown, and that is a large circle that also includes Lake Compescus. So we want to make it the best we can for the whole community and not just the lake. So I want to thank everybody for their input and look forward to taking on the next step.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak or ask a question? Councilman Jurens?
I'm with Randy. I think we've made some large steps tonight, and a lot of my sentiment and a lot of the way I voted a little bit ago was taking the ideas and opinions of those that have been talking passionately about this lake. And another reason, and then another comment that I hear is you were elected by that ward. And if there's someone out there that can talk and echo this, and I am going to name a lake here, is that they don't want this looking like Lake Okoboji. There's a few people that still go down there to visit, but they've had enough after a weekend. The restaurants you're not able to get a reservation. The traffic is horrible. And that, this is part of this discussion. So I think we've taken large steps. I hope that the lake residents and the city of Watertown know that we are adamantly going to keep working on this to make this work for all of us and to keep the peace and the quiet opportunities that we all enjoy out there right now. There is a lot of access out there right now. There's access at there's bunches of access out there right now. And we all know someone that, usually we know someone that lives at the lake. We can go enjoy that. So there's tons of opportunities. The accesses that I'm talking about are the public accesses that have half been covered up by materials, neighbors. They're at every public right-of-way. There's multiple. There's one at least every mile out there of lakeshore. They're not in good shape. The boat ramps are all beat up. And I would guess that is our budget. Here we go with money again. That is our responsibility, that if we want to continue to offer more access at the lake, we have all of those that we can get more access to. And there's nothing more than enjoying somebody who pulls out there in a group of boats on the weekends in the summer with a Lund boat that probably costs about $1,000, and they're having just as much fun as the people who have a $100,000 boat. So there's tons of swimming, there's tons of opportunities, and the boat ramps aren't full. So that gives maybe a little bit of background on why I voted earlier, and to agree with Councilman Tupper that we've gone a long ways tonight.
Question for me, I don't know who to direct it to. I was just looking for some clarification. Are all those boat ramps at Compesca, are those city-owned boat ramps? I was under the impression that some might have been Game Fish and Parks. Does anyone know? Okay. Yeah, I think a couple of them are Game Fish and Parks. Anyway, not terribly important. I was just curious about that. Any questions, comments?
This is for Mr. Von Eye, and this is just a clarification. I'm trying to read through here, and this relates to the campgrounds and what the caretakers' homes can be. I understand the mobile home, I get that one. But I'm trying to figure out exactly what a manufactured home is and how that compares to a modular home, because a manufactured home, not allowed. but a modular home is apparently, because it's not stated that it can't be. What is the difference there? They're both made off-site. What's the difference between them? Give me and if you can, help me visually understand the difference. If you've got one that you can say, well, over here is a manufactured home or something.
Yes, certainly.
Director Von Eye?
If I could call on Community Development Manager Hanton, she just recently did some research on this with our building official, Reed Peterson, and they were able to provide some clarity to that. But I'll tee that discussion up. The same association, I couldn't remember their name of earlier, also helps classify manufactured homes, mobile homes, RVs, campers, and how they're built all defines these definitions so that they can get universally applied through zoning ordinances across the country. With that being said, I'll pass it off to you, Community Development Manager Hanton.
Thank you, Director Von Eye. So the mobile home, that is basically mobile home and manufactured home are the same thing, and I did misspeak on that. So mobile home is built prior to 1976, and then manufactured homes are in compliance with the HUD requirements. And that is post 1976. And then the modular home would be a ready-built Cashway home, Steinmetz, anything of that nature.
Right.
So if I can, Mayor, for clarification. So really, mobile homes aren't manufactured anymore. Now they're manufactured homes.
Correct.
That's same thing, we just decided to call them something different. Somebody did.
Yep. And that is just industry standard. And then also, as we go through our recodification, we are planning on, that's why we perform this research, is that we want to clarify further, because right now we have it broken down into type 1, type 2, and type 3 manufactured homes. And it's quite a lengthy, convoluted ordinance. So we are working on just clarifying that and making that just easier to allow people to read and utilize. And then that they would be manufactured homes, mobile homes, those would be allowed in the R4 manufactured home district.
Is there any councilman who would like to ask a question or make a comment?
Right here.
Would anyone like to speak a second? Do you have a question or comment?
Does it matter that they're built on an I-beam?
Have you heard the question, and would you like to answer it, or go to Community Development Manager Hanton? Does it matter if it's built on an I-beam?
I can add to that.
How about we get the first question answered first?
Yeah, Mr.
Director
Mayor.
Von Eye?
So again, if you're referring to the tiny homes, Councilman, is that what you're referring to?
All manufactured homes are built on a steel I-beam, similar to the tiny home.
Sure.
And that's really different than the Steinmetz type of built home that's set on a solid foundation.
Mm-hmm. Correct.
These can be set on a block with tie downs.
Yeah. How the HUD categorizes these, Housing and Urban Development, how the regulations, not only them, but there's another agency too that works with them, I believe, that creates these categories for these structures. How exactly they define them, I don't believe is solely based on whether it's an I-beam. The reason I say that is I used to be an avid camper. I haven't for years, but when our camper had an I-beam, 2 of them running down, hooked onto the axles and carried the weight of the camper. So I think that there's a lot of things that go into that equation, not just necessarily that one, if that makes sense.
Is there another councilman who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Councilman Tupper.
I want to make a comment to Councilman Jurens. You made fact that we all probably know somebody lives at the lake and that we could enjoy their, I'll take my steak medium rare, be there 7 o'clock Saturday night.
Councilman Jurens, you do not have to answer that. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the amendment. All those in favor will say aye. Opposed, nay. Please call the roll.
Okay, Tupper,
Aye.
Bueller, Danforth.
Aye.
Helene.
Aye.
Jurgens.
Aye.
Peters.
Aye.
Shetty.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. We're on to item F. These are two different items. We will take the testimony on them all at one time. It is the Rusink, am I pronouncing that right? Rusink Stafferin addition, annexation, and zoning. Item 1 is approval of resolution initiating the annexation of that land. And number 2 is the second reading establishing the zoning designation of CL on that land. We will take the testimony and the questions and the comments combined, but we will vote on two separate actions. We'll go to our Public Works Director, Von Eye, for more information.
Thank you, Mayor. If I could just take 2 quick minutes, I just wanted those last 3 items, I wanted to provide a point of clarity because I often feel like staff, we talk about this stuff, myself as a director and the community development manager, Hanton, city manager. Even though we're discussing this stuff at length, I want it to be clear that those aren't initiatives by staff or from staff. Sometimes I think they can come across that way because we're trying to educate on the topic, but I just want to make sure that these are a collective effort through the committees over the last several years that former Councilman Vilhauer spoke to, and efforts of the previous Planning Commission and council actions, but not a staff initiative that have been brought forward by any means. Now, staff have played a crucial role in that because between Brandy and I, we've got a quarter of a century of experience administering these kind of regulations. We can ramble them off, talk to them, and try to portray them in a way that help make sense to the general public on what they mean. But I just wanted to emphasize that because we speak to them frequently and fluently, they're not necessarily an idea born from the staff to be passed down through the regulations. For whatever that's worth, we can move on with this proposed annexation and zoning. This is a parcel out on the west side of the lake. This is the second reading, so the action tonight will be final on this particular matter. This was recommended for approval by the Planning Commission at a vote of 5-1 at their August 10th meeting. And, the Planning Commission recommended approval of the annexation at a vote of 5-0. They recommended approval of the zoning at a vote of 5-1. So unanimous on the annexation and a mildly split vote on the zoning designation of CL. But this parcel does meet all the CL requirements from a zoning administrative standpoint, the minimum area required, all the things of that nature. It's within the boundary defined to utilize the CL district, and that is what the applicant wanted to pursue, and then why this application is before the board tonight. And with the, I'll make this point now, that with the recently passed amendments, because this has not passed yet, and the ordinance amendments will become effective the 20th day after action was taken, that if this were to pass, they would fall under the confines of the newly amended ordinance. I wanted to make that point briefly here as well, in case anybody had that question. With that, I'll stand by for any questions.
Thank you, Director Von Eye. With that, I will open public hearing. If anybody's here to speak for or against it, please come forward.
That on for me? My name is Jill Feist. I'm at 816 North Lake Drive, just down from, well, we're across from the land in question. I have concerns in that there doesn't seem to be anything solid. This is the biggest moving target I have ever seen. Different things have been suggested that the land would be used for. One which sticks in my mind is for equestrian therapy, but horses aren't allowed on city property. And it's just a continuation of that kind of moving target that gives me a bad feeling. and I hope I'm wrong. But it just doesn't seem logical. And I am asking for a no on the annexation.
Thank you very much. We are still in a public hearing. Is there anyone else who would like to testify on this?
Yes, I just have one question.
Please identify yourself again.
Doug Modica, Director of the Lake Campesca Water Project District, and I live right across the street from this property. And my question is, if this is accepted, then that means even if there's a meeting, if the council, the planning commission and the council gets together and says, no, if they said, we're going to change everything, that everything is conditional use zoning, if they do that after we pass this, does that mean then that if you agree to this tonight and the zoning is accepted for this property, that means that if that property is sold, somebody can come in and do a retail establishment, a service establishment, a restaurant, or some of the other things that are included in the permitted use. Is that correct? In other words, they'd be kind of like grandfathered in. And any change, do you understand what my question is?
Well, you're asking, I believe, if I'm getting this right, if there is a change of ownership, would the zoning of CL still apply to the land, and then the subsequent owner would be able to do anything that is permissible under CL as long as it's permissible uses, and if they wanted to do a conditional use, then they'd have to come back in front of the Plan Commission.
Well, yes, any conditional use would require
But the-
reapplying, but the permitted use would be available.
So the, I believe, is that a correct phrasing of your question? That if it's sold, the permitted uses would still be permitted, if it's sold.
The permitted
let me
uses
rephrase.
as they are right now.
Because let's
Yes.
say if we accept the zoning request, the Rusinks could build any permitted use.
Yes,
So-
despite a council, anybody changing the zoning down to everything's conditional.
Okay, are you asking if the land is changed in either ownership or proposal, or?
Okay, if the zoning is changed after you accept their taking over the zoning under the current permitted use, and then later the zoning is changed to conditional,
Okay,
then
so
they're
if the
under the permitted
let's say
use.
if there are future amendments to the CL zoning
Yes.
district, would that apply to
Yes,
these owners
yes.
or any subsequent owner? Okay.
Yes.
City Manager Mack.
I'm definitely going to defer to
Okay.
that side of the room.
Director Von Eye or Attorney Carrico.
All right, I drew the short straw on that one, I guess. So, okay. So landowner goes to CL. Right now, the CL that you have adopted, they can do what's under it, okay?
Yes.
Then, let's say they haven't done it, and we've now changed the CL, and let's just say we moved something to conditional, another item, whatever it is. So now, the landowner, after adoption of that amendment, yes, if they wanted to do what we have now moved into conditional, then they would have to request it a conditional, because that is the current ordinance at the time that they are doing what they want to now do. But let's say, so that we're clear, because now you're looking at me all funny, so if landowner is doing, I need to pick something now so that we're clear on this. I have to have a better example. All right. I want to do a boat repair shop. I'm going to pick boat repair shop. So I change my thing to CL. Currently, right now, the way that it's at CL, I got to ask for a conditional use. Okay? Let's say there's a further amendment and we get rid of boat shops altogether. Let's just say you can't do one at all. Well, then later on, if I didn't have a boat shop and I wanted a boat shop, I can't get one because it's not under the current ordinance at the time that I want that use. Now here's what I'm going to call the twist. So I adopt a boat shop right now. Council's adopted this ordinance. I go for my conditional use. Board of Adjustment says yes. And somebody else buys my land and wants to continue to run a boat shop, but we've changed the ordinance now to a conditional use. If it's a separate owner, do they have to? It would be, and I'm going to point at the community development manager because I want to make sure I get this right. Correct. Since they've already got it on the original ordinance, even though it's gone now, whoever bought the land can continue to run it as a boat shop. Clear as mud, right? I was trying to make that as simple as possible, and I might have
I
muckied
think
it up.
Councilman Tupper had a pretty good summation. You are bound by the rules under which you get your building permit under. Or whatever rules are in effect when you take out your building permit are the rules that you will be operating under on that land going forward. Whether amendments come in 6 months, 6 years, 60 years.
Yeah, wrong side of the issue. The boat shop was under conditional. I was asking about permitted.
Yeah, and
And so it's backwards. In other words, if they're going to have to go to conditional to get storage units, okay? And then, if you pass this, but then, and they're not putting in a restaurant, okay? But if they sell if you accept their zoning, and then they sell their property, then somebody can put in a restaurant because they came in under allowing restaurants in permitted use. As Councilman Bueller said, he would like, I'm sorry, retail and service establishments to go into conditional. And so somebody comes in and says, after it's sold, well, I want to put in a retail establishment. Well, that was in there at the time that they were accepted for zoning.
Okay, I'm going to go to City Manager Mack for an answer on that.
Thank you, Mayor. So the land is what it is today. The zoning is what it is today. But if the zoning changes and they have not applied for a bill, so if all those permitted uses get moved down to conditional use and they have not taken out a building permit for any of those previously permitted uses, then they have to go through the conditional use process. They're not automatically grandfathered into permitted uses.
Oh, I've never heard that before. I thought that if you get permitted use zoning, anybody that buys the property can do those permitted uses.
Only if those permitted uses are still part of the zoning.
Oh,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
And that's where it could change later.
Yes, so if through the next conversations, if the council would say, we want to move retail establishments to conditional use, and they have not already established a retail establishment, they would then have to go through the conditional use process.
Oh, very good, very good. I understand that then. Okay, I guess we're happy with that then. If
We
that
like
works.
getting to that.
Oh, no. I know what my question was. Yes, you're going to have to go, you're going to have to go through the planning and zoning, and if somebody does do a conditional use, I think what you're saying is, and they accept that conditional use, then it doesn't have to go to any hearing, doesn't have to go to the council, and that's what you're talking about, that you might, Mayor Holeen suggested that if the conditional use goes to the zoning people and they approve it, we're trying to say that's not a done deal then. Then it can come to the council, and then we can decide if we want to go with that.
Definitely
Possibly
don't take
that-
my word for it. I'm not an
No.
expert, but I would.
No,
go City
I think I
Manager.
heard that this evening, and that would be a wonderful idea. Otherwise, there's no hearing There's no hearing for conditional uses?
There is a public hearing.
Oh.
So the value of the Board of Adjustment is just that. It is a public hearing, and there is notification sent to the neighbors. Additionally, the Board of Adjustment is a non-legislative body.
I heard that.
And so what they do is then bound by the courts. So if the Board of Adjustment were to deny an application, the applicant would not come to the council to appeal that. They would go through the court system. I have seen cases in previous communities where the Board of Adjustment made a decision that the city did not agree with, and the city took the Board of Adjustment to court. So there are some checks and balances, but there is a public hearing for conditional uses, and it is published and advertised the same way that public hearings for the Planning Commission and the City Council are done.
Good. Then my understanding is if our neighbors have storage units there, that's the only thing that's going to be there. And if they sell it, you basically start over. If somebody wants to do something else.
No.
No.
What triggers them starting over is if the language within the ordinance changes.
Oh, yes, we hope. Well,
Yeah.
we could hope. All right. Then that's fine. I'm done.
Okay. Is there anyone else who would like to testify on this item? I think it would be appropriate for the petitioners to.
JC Stafford Rushing. I'm part of the applicants. Have my husband, Colt, here behind me, and as well as my father, who is a partial investor in making this possible for this property we were married on, that our late friend Chuck, we knew him to live on, and all the memories we made there, and this dream that we kind of didn't always think would be possible when we first moved across the street, kind of haphazardly. It just happened that the place across the street was for sale when we started looking for homes. And part of it kind of felt kismet, and yet it feels surreal to be in a position where maybe this land could be part of a lineage that came from one of our friends and family friends of Colt's family into something that would stay with us, hopefully forever, and that is our goal. I agree with the sentiments of, we want to take a closer look at how we want to develop. I think that's why we have planning commissions. That's why we have city councils, is taking a close look of how and what we want our city to look like as it grows. I absolutely come from a family where we want to build a bigger table than build higher walls, but I understand there's reason and boundaries that should be placed within that. What we wish over there is for it to remain so much of exactly what it looks like, but polished up a bit. We live across the street. We intend to continue living across the street. I have one son who's 1 year old. We plan to have more children, whether we have them biologically or adopt. And I will have to put my kids to bed across the street. And I also want to have something that is lovely and not disruptive. And we live by our neighbors who, we do respect and love, and we want them to enjoy where they live too. Goodness, I don't want to hear about where I live every day. I don't want knocks at my door being like, this blows, and I certainly respect that. And that will be important to us moving forward. I hope that the council can give us the honor of trust in trusting this with us, that, I see as far as the free market goes, beyond all of the important decisions you guys make, the only way that we could control we knew that we could control, I guess, that this property across from us could stay in a way that's so sentimental and special to us, in the way that we want to see it across from where we live, was for us to find a way to buy it ourselves. And that's what we're doing. And I think in large part we are protecting so much of what we want it to look like and what I hope our neighbors would want it to be as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to testify on this item?
My name is Scott Stoffer, and I'm also one of the petitioners. I just wanted to address one thing that came up, wetlands a couple times. And the issue of wetlands would be the same whether annexed into the city or staying where it is. No matter what happens to those wetlands, which we have no intention of changing, but if it stayed in the rural, in the county, as agricultural, it's still bound by the same rules. So it wouldn't make any difference, the annexation. I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to testify? I'll close the public hearing, open it up for council action just on item 1, which is an approval of the resolution initiating the annexation.
Aye.
Motion made by Councilman Tupper. Need a second, Councilman Bueller. Open it up for discussion. I will allow discussion on both items at the same time, as they are pretty much combined, but we are really taking official action on the annexation. I will also allow questions to the people who testified in public hearing, as I believe that there might be some questions for the petitioners. However, I will urge council to keep it specifically just to a question. Do not enter into debate with them. The questions are for more information. Questions, comments, council? Councilman Danforth.
This, the one element of this that has got me concerned, I'll just call it that, and that is where we are going to potentially bring this into our community and to zone this in such a manner that we're going to allow horses in our community. And I know, having gone through the ordinance language here recently, that our ordinance is specific to, I think, 3 different residential zones that do not allow horses under most conditions. There are some exceptions. I can't help but question the logic of us wanting and allowing horses. I don't see how they differ from cows or pigs or goats, you know. I know the difference. I was on a farm once, but what I'm saying is to have them and to allow them. Those animals are, let's be honest, they're associated to either the zoo or the agricultural area. Once we bring this in, we're saying that it can, like apparently any other commercial business, in commercial property here in our community, can have horses. I question that that's a right and logical thing for us to do overall. Now, and that's an element of mine here. Now, this property that you have, it might spur other commercial development around you. And again, then you've got horses in amongst other commercial properties. And it just seems like, I'm not sure that was the intent way back when, and I do know I was a part of discussions many years ago in regards to horses here in town. And the elimination of them, I was very shocked when I read the fact that it was only certain residential areas and not to a citywide scenario. So that's my one concern. Otherwise, I'm good with everything. The one question that I would have, if I may, is to, for that purpose, to why not keep this within, and I know Mr. Von Ay had touched on it a little bit, but why not keep the property into the county and fulfill your dreams as it is today and just further develop it? I guess that's a question I have.
Ms., you do not have to answer it. However, you may if you choose to.
Yep. Our understanding with multiple conversations with, Colt, do you want to speak to this at all? Yeah. The director, we've.
Just please identify yourself.
Colt Rushink. I live right across the road at 794 North Lake Drive. I am also one of the petitioners. We actually did reach out to Luke Muller with the county and spoke to him, and he told us that first we do need to come to the city, kind of like a first right of refusal, before they would even look at doing anything. So that's kind of the process, and speaking to Brandy and Luke, between the both of them, this is kind of how the city and the county work when you annex a new joint jurisdiction property. They come to you guys first to see if you do want to do it, and if not, then we go to them and they'll try and work with us more. And also some of the things that we did want to do within that, I guess Brandy kind of mentioned that it would be more in alignment with the city and the CL district.
Essentially, our understanding was the county will maintain you as long as you're not really building anything on it, including probably like a storage shed or what it may be. As the city grows, I think I can understand the desire for the city to have say and their own conditions that I think are in place to protect residents, such as screening, all the things that we've talked about a little bit today and touched on, and talking about language and very, those specific things that the county doesn't necessarily have in place. And so I think it becomes a thing for them, out of respect for the city and growth, to be able to allow that control first to the city, if that makes sense. Look, I mean, candidly, from a standpoint of just like money, would it be less for us to not pay taxes in the city? Sure. And I think right when we bought it, we were like, we'll just do what we want in the county, and it'll be great because we know that what we are doing won't necessarily, or what we want won't affect the neighbors or I guess any much differently than what was already taking place there, and the insurances that we'd put in place just to maintain that. Mm-hmm. And also there are, legal, what's the word I'm looking for? Extremities and pathways that prevent us from just making that decision on our own. And we respect that. And that's why we're here, is because we are two people, and my family joined, that want to respect the rules and the laws.
Sir, the microphone is on, so we could hear the whispering.
Yeah.
What he was saying is that if we were to do things through the county, they actually would require us to list that as a primary residence. So one of us would have to live there. She could technically live at the lake on the lakeside, and I would have to live at that property.
I would invite him over sometimes if he's good.
So yes, we did reach out to the county first, and if we ever wanted to build anything, we would have to come to the city because of the joint jurisdiction that you guys share. And yes, I would have to live there as a primary residence.
Councilman Danforth, the floor is still yours.
I do have a question. If this goes CL, then the home that's there there cannot be any residential activity on that site, correct?
I will direct it to City Manager Mack. Director Von Eye. Manager Hanton.
So the residents, and I'm not sure where that question came from since we passed it around, but thank you, Mayor, for the question. The residents would be considered legal nonconforming. And then also you can, and how the CL district was amended, you can have apartments as a conditional use, which then was clarified further to be the multifamily dwelling types. So the, obviously, apartments, row housing, or a complex, which could be the definition is a group of homes. So there would be routes for additional apartments through the conditional use process through the Board of Adjustment, but the house would exist as legal nonconforming. And we see plenty of that in commercial districts today, that there are residences that have existed prior to the zoning.
Thank you. The floor is still yours, Councilman Danforth. All right. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question or make a speech? Councilman Shetty, would you like to ask a question or talk?
Just talk.
Okay.
Thank you, Mayor. So just to shed some light on this subject, there's been many concerns and legitimate concerns that people have brought up that I know that if I was in some of those shoes, I'd have been asking the same questions. I'm going to use an example of mine that I had years back, where I had built a house on South Lake Drive, probably 20 years ago or so. And across the road from that house that I built, it had quite a large parking lot. It had I believe a restaurant bar type scenario and 18 holes of golf. So it was the Prairie Winds golf course. And building the house, it was already there. Parking lot was there. There was much traffic from sun up to sundown with tee times, and I was right across from the driveway, the entrance, the first entrance to it on the east side. And after we built the house, the first year we had a little boy, and 3 years later another little boy, and so we had 2 little boys that I was raising there, and there was no bike trail yet. I'd heard of a bike trail coming around the lake someday, but I didn't get that. It didn't happen when I was there because we sold it then a few years later. But it was a good environment. It was the traffic and having 2 little boys, you got to be cautious with that on that road, especially they're not real deep lots. So I understand the concerns that people do have. I had the same concerns. If I would have, let's just say I would have built that house and then the golf course would have came in and there was all these, there's deer across the road I could watch in the mornings and I could have, hearing word of a golf course coming in and a big parking lot across the road and bar and restaurant, I probably would have evaluated that and would have brought some concerns and just like other people are as well. At the same token, as we work through it and living there now in that environment with that across the road, it worked out just fine. We adapted to it and it created a good environment for the lake where it added more for people to come out to the lake. It added an environment for golfers to come out and utilize and still it's open today. And so as much as I'm saying I do appreciate the concerns, I've lived this. I mean, I've been across from, a place like this and not like what you guys are doing. I don't think you're putting a putt-putt golf course in or something, but I don't know. But
Not unless all the neighbors come knocking on my door every day and night asking for it.
Okay, well, there you go. But, so, whatever, granted, there's wisdom. That's why we're having this conversation. I do appreciate this Commercial Lake 101 class we're having tonight. This has been, actually, it's been very educational. And I believe for all of us in this room and those who are probably going to be listening to this down the road, a lot of good information has come out, and I believe we are making progress. So on this particular action with the roosting stuffer in addition, I'm voting yes just because the vote can't even be based off their vision. We're voting on if this can be a CL zoning or not. You guys could change what you wanted to do potentially, but I still would vote yes because I've lived on the lake for 13 years and across the road, all 3 places I lived on. Before I built the house, were all across from the golf course with a lot of activity on that road and a big parking lot. And you know what? You adapt, and it worked out just fine. So, thank you.
Thank you. Question from me. I don't want to take anyone else. There was a mention of horses. Could anyone provide some clarification? Are horses allowed? How many? What capacity? Director Von High, are you the one to answer that?
Yeah, and I can refer to the city attorney if she would like to chime in. According to the use of horses in the CL and reading the definition of a recreational use, that's where we believe horses could be allowed. That's also in tandem with the animal control section of our ordinance that explicitly prohibits horses from being in the listed residential units that Councilman Danforth referenced earlier. So if you take that section that explicitly says you can't have them in X, Y, Z residential zones, and you take our recreational use definition, those things together let us down the belief that the way the ordinance is written today, horse use is acceptable in the CL district.
Attorney Carrico, anything to add? Okay, thank you. Anyone else would like to ask a question or make a comment? Councilman Tupper.
I got a comment. Basically, we've seen a lot of, like I said earlier, we've seen a lot of questions, and this has been, the CL district has been a kind of heartburn to all of us. First off, I want to thank the petitioners because between the Board of Adjustments and this city council, the things you've had to sit through, you definitely want this. I mean, you've put yourself through a lot. I respect the fact that, you know, a lot of people have said, well, my property and my home is going to go down if they're allowed to do that. Well, when I just heard that you're still planning on living on the lakeside, that tells me a lot also. So you're still going to protect that value of your home yourself. So just basically, I want to thank you for allowing the process to work its way through, no matter how this vote comes out tonight, although I will be supporting it. Thank you for your patience, and I love dreamers, put it that way. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Councilman Peters.
I would start off by saying that JC and Colt, you guys have some very fair opposition, if you can even call it that. When Doug knows the names of your kids and dogs, I would say that's pretty good. But I would echo Councilman Schutte and Councilman Tepper's comments. I'm supporting this tonight because you guys acted in good faith with the city zoning ordinances that we have in place today. You guys move forward with the rules that this council and the previous council put in place. So I cannot sit here and deny this based on you guys trying to go around the rules. You followed the rules. It's our fault that we haven't kept up with the times and changed the zoning ordinances comparatively for how the city's growing, how the lake is growing. As you heard tonight, there's a lot of things we need to work on. There's a lot of things that we're going to consider. I don't think this is over yet, but when you guys drop the permit, I'm voting on this based on the rules that were in place. So I thank you. I appreciate your guys' resiliency. I know this hasn't been easy. I thank the opposition for coming here. These are all great thoughts. And if anything, this has helped us frame up where we need to go from here. The more permits that we get in front of us, the more accurately we can make better decisions. So thank you, but I will be supporting this.
Thank you.
Any further comments? Councilman Jurgens, have you spoken already? Not on this one.
That's true, Mayor. Thank you. This is not personal. This is listening to the comments. And when I went door to door when I was campaigning and knocked on just about every door around the lake, this was the number one issue, other than the bike trail on the west side of the lake. We're not done with that, I hope. Because when they talk about safety issues and traffic, they talk about the runners and the bikers and the added traffic on the west side, and it is a major issue. But number one was this. I didn't even know this was on the docket. I knew that there was an issue on the south side of the lake that had a lot of discussions similar to this. But I'm going to listen tonight to numerous, and I mean numerous, conversations that I've had with residents. I'm fine with the yes votes that I've heard from the three of you. That's what the process is all about. We have had, and I believe we've had a PUD option available since the beginning. So by me voting no doesn't mean that I'm against this project. I am for this project. I have two young ladies that I believe will come back to Watertown one day and get married. And that's the kind of venue that I want. And of the multiple emails that I received, all of them, a majority of them, would like to see your specific project, but they all turn around and say, but the next project. Maybe the finances don't work out. It's not my job. But in the world of planning, we talk about the 3 Ds and P, and that is death, divorce, and disability and profit. If those 3 things come up, and they always do, then that's what they are concerned about. I could read multiple highlighted areas of this, and that is the theme. Again, horses come up. They've been brought up. But really, it is the next stage of a development. And we have watched developments right now with this zone change instantly. And they are affecting the livelihoods of those that are living around them. And so it's not personal. It's just what's been happening. That is why I will be voting not against this, but in a way against the messy situation that we're starting to clean up tonight. A lot of this has to do with my questions earlier tonight, and I'm sure everyone heard the theme, is where it's going to go and where future developments like this are going to go. Questions? Yeah, really, a few questions. I'm going to not mention names, but are tiny homes in a conversation?
We have talked about, but not like the way that you were talking about tiny homes tonight was like almost like the almost pre-manufactured mobile homes. We've talked about building within a tree belt way back a couple cottages that we could, for people who are like there for retreats and or weddings, would maybe, instead of renting out an entire home, like that's, 5-6 bedrooms, having this very small, quaint option. It's also an opportunity for us as we kind of outgrow our home but want to stay on the lake. They're not making more lake property. We love the space we're in. We like our neighbors. We like the width that we have in between us and the road. And it has, again, so many memories for us. But as we kind of outgrow the bedroom space for our home with our kids, it would also offer an opportunity for, my family to stay as they're, coming to visit too.
Scott Stoffer, one of the petitioners, in response. Cottages we're kind of in the initial stages of looking at something like that, very few in number, if we did it. But they would be on a foundation. They're not going to be something that's going to have an I-beam underneath them. They're not going to be something that is on wheels. It is intended, what we would want to have is something on a permanent foundation that looks beautiful in the area. It adds to the benefit of what we're trying to accomplish without hurting the neighborhood. Certainly nothing in the neighborhood of what you've talked about in tiny homes or in campgrounds. Nothing
like that, no.
May I continue, Mayor?
You can follow up.
Well, this wasn't a question really for them. This was a question for the future. It's not really directed at this specific development. It's this piece of property and future properties that are coming before us. Other questions are, if we do this on this, there's a section of area down the road, again, not you. You can purchase it. I'm sure it's going to be up for sale, one day. But will this set a precedence for other votes and other commercial development that's just going to keep going right down across the road from not only 15 residential homes, but another 30 or 40? That, again, I'm not asking for a question. Then I'd have to ask the question to everyone in here that's living in their peaceful home with just a few neighbors in town. Would it be fair to plop a restaurant right in the middle of your property? Would it be fair, and I'm going to just go down through the permitted uses. Would it be fair to dump any of those permitted uses in there? Would it be fair to plop a campground across the road from your residence or on the corner next to you? I know there's ordinances. I know they'd have to buy extra land. They'd have to, I understand that, but there's plenty land there that when this changes hands, it's going to happen someday. The extra acres that are around this and available for sale right now, you bring that in, this can change very quickly. So those are the questions, and I listened very closely to the answers that staff has done a good job in answering, and I am not hearing that there's a place to stop this. these types of future. And it was maybe said earlier, 40, 50, 35, even 5 days down the road once this is done, once this is purchased. These things can change instantly, and they can change even before we've had time in November, December to look at other changes. So I guess I don't have a lot of questions, but I am going to vote the way that residents, not just across the road, but residents all the way around Lake Compesca are feeling right now.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to ask a question or comment? Councilman Bueller?
Thank you, Mayor. You know, responsible planning is always what can happen with any of the conditional uses anytime. That's what we always have to look at. And you're wonderful people, I'm sure of that, and your intentions are honorable. But what I see on here, and Lynn brought up some interesting comments too with the restaurants and so forth, but I just want to tell the rest of the council that I think this is why we need to consider retail establishments going to conditional use, because they could be a convenience store or petroleum sales. Those are permitted uses in our definition if we allow that CL designation for that location. I'm a bit reluctant to vote for this, to go along with this because of that. It kind of goes against my beliefs in planning. But I'm doing it on the pretense that we hopefully see our way to move that away from permitted uses. I just don't think those are savory operations for locations of that nature, convenience stores or petroleum sales. But I'm going to support this tonight, and I just hope my brothers on the council have the foresight to make that change moving forward.
Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? You've already spoken twice. I'll give you leniency. No.
I spoke once.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Thank you.
I would echo Councilman Bueller's comments that it makes me feel better that the public has heard from each councilman on here that we are going to continue this conversation. And not only me, but that the residents that have reached out to me, I hear your concerns. I hear them. And they are passionate. And we shouldn't consider this as an option to make future changes, but as something that we need to do moving forward.
Thank you. Councilman Danforth hasn't spoken yet on this topic, so Councilman Danforth.
I'm very introverted, Mayor. I normally don't say much. Well, you know, one of the things that I fall back on is how did we get to this point? And my greatest disappointment here is not with anybody that's out here. It's certainly not with the people that are requesting here. My greatest disappointment is that we've been having different levels of discussion about addressing this ordinance for over a year, for 14, 15, 16 months. And we have gotten nowhere with it. It's because the first understanding was that it didn't need to get looked at. Well, now we're all, with all kinds of attention, it's 8:30, and this is what we spent most of our time on. We spent many, many, many hours on it. I'm going to vote for this, and I'll tell you why. It's not your fault that we haven't done our jobs. And I mean that. It's our fault, and it disappoints the heck out of me that we are where we're at. I've heard time and time again that this ordinance has been developed around the Lake Compesco Master Plan. And I'm looking at it right now. And one of the things that came out of that, and it's right at the top of this, was to limit development. Limit commercial development. Create centers for commercial development. Centers doesn't mean spot zoning. It means create an area that we can have multiple developments or multiple commercial developments within one area, not there and then there and there and there. But that's not your fault, and it's certainly not your fault that we allow horses anywhere except in R1, 2, 3, and 4. Because of that, I can't sit here and hold this against you. That's not your fault. And as hesitant as I am to vote for this, I'm going to do it. But I'm betting on the come. I'm betting on the come that we are going to do our jobs, hopefully. And whatever that means, wherever the dust settles, we'll do our jobs like we should be doing, like we should have done. We wouldn't have found ourselves in this position today and having many of these discussions. So that's where I'm at.
Councilman Peters?
Yeah, just a quick comment to round out my thoughts here. Earlier tonight, we approved a commercial rezone just as fast as we could get our microphones off. That was done. My hope and goal would be to get to the same level of confidence for the Lake Campesca, the CL zoning ordinance. Because if we're not confident in our zoning ordinances, how can we expect the public to be confident? So all this discussion has nothing to do with the Roos Inc. project. This has everything to do with the CL zoning district. And so my hope and goal would be to find the confidence and find the package that we can rally around so we can provide a consistent voting record for people that come to us for requests. Just a comment.
Thank you. Any further comments? All those in favor will say aye. Opposed, nay. Please call the roll.
Okay, Tupper,
Aye.
Bueller, Danforth,
Aye.
Pauline,
Aye.
Jurens,
Nay.
Peters,
Aye.
Shetty.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. We're on to item G, a second reading of an ordinance authorizing the finance officer to certify the, sorry, yeah, you're right, sorry.
Sorry.
I need a motion on the second reading of the establishing of the zoning designation of CL. Oh, actually, yeah. I did do a public hearing on both of them. That was clear. So I'm sorry. Who made that motion? Councilman Shetty? Seconded by Councilman Tupper. Any discussion on this? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the CL zoning. All those in favor will say aye. Opposed, nay. Please call the roll.
Okay, Tupper,
Aye.
Bueller, Danforth,
Aye.
Pauline,
Aye.
Jurens,
Nay.
Peters,
Aye.
Shetty.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Motion carries. Now we are on to item G, a second reading of an ordinance authorizing the finance officer to certify the property tax levy to the Cottington County Auditor. Finance Officer Bob Zine, or City Manager Mack. Finance Officer Bob Zine.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Yes, before the council, in the past, this has normally been part of the budget, but now that we moved our budget process, it's a separate ordinance that comes forward. So this will certify the property taxes payable for 2024 in the amount of $4,284,187. So that's pretty much it. If there's any questions, I can answer them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Chair will entertain a motion to authorize the certification. Motion made by Councilman Bueller, seconded by Councilman Shetty. Conversation on this, council. Hearing none, the motion is to approve the authorization, and we'll just do a voice vote. All those in favor will say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. In other business, item A is an approval of a resolution, the plat of Willow Creek Village 6th addition to the municipality of Watertown, and authorize the city manager to sign the private street maintenance agreement to be filed with the plat. Director Von Eye.
Thank you, Mayor. We have a plat before the council tonight that's been recommended for approval by the Planning Commission unanimously. I'll share my screen. Shows a depiction of what that plat will look like. It's a creation of 6 lots along Willow Creek Drive with a private drive within that property. That private drive is an approvable, acceptable means for access to these lots per our zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations. One of the reasons in part why that's being required internally to this land is so that each of these individual lots don't have their own individual access onto Willow Creek Drive. As you can imagine, the traffic conflicts that might create on that type of roadway. I do have an aerial map with the designated zoning. Again, you're on Willow Creek Drive. Here's 28th Street that leads into the Lakes Willow Creek subdivision, and back in there is where the new ice arena is being built. And this property here is north of Willow Creek Villages, I believe it's called, right to the south. With that, I'll stand by for any questions.
Thank you very much. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the resolution. Motion made by Councilman Danforth, seconded by Councilman Peters. Open it up for discussion and comments. I would just like to say that it's nice to see movement on that land. I know that that has been TIFed for quite some time, and there has been a lack of movement, and that has been much to the consternation of the city of Watertown and has hurt. So it's nice to see movement out there. I do believe that some of that, at least, is coming off of the city's commitment to put the ice arena out there. So it's nice to see that there's movement. Granted, this is no guarantee that something actually is built there, but it's a next step. So it's nice to see. Any further comments? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the resolution. We're just going to do a voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item B is an approval of resolution for the plat of Valley View 3rd Edition. Director Von Eye.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is a simple replat. Again, I'll share a map. It's a simple replat of an area up in Valley View subdivision. Here you have 2nd Street Northwest. Leads up to the Lutheran Church there on the north end of town. There's these lots adjacent to 2nd Street that the owner wishes to subdivide in the proposed plat layout as shown in the council packet right here. It'll become, 3 lots will essentially become 2 lots, 1A and 2A, for development purposes for that, that developer's intentions behind that land ownership. With that, I'll stand by for questions.
Thank you. The chair will entertain a motion to approve the resolution. Motion made by Councilman Schutte, seconded by Councilman Beeler. Conversation, questions, council? Hearing none, the motion is to approve the resolution. We're just going to do a voice vote. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, say nay. Motion carries. Item C is an approval to reinstate the solid waste manager position with the Public Works Department at grade 175 with the 2023 salary range of between roughly $79,000 to $104,000. City Manager Mack, please explain what this is all about.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll say a little bit, and then I will have our Public Works Director speak as well. As you all know, our long-time, solid waste and wastewater superintendent Mike Berger retired a few months ago, and we have been taking that time since his retirement to really vet out and discern what the right path forward for those 2 divisions of Public Works is. It was sort of an anomaly, and it is an anomaly in that world to have someone managing both systems. And it was sort of serendipitous timing that Mike was placed into both of those. And he did a great job. But in looking at the needs of both divisions, and they are very separate, and they do very separate functions for the city, in talking with current supervisory staff, looking at some of the challenges that both of those divisions face, we believe it's important to reinstate a separate solid waste manager position. It's important to note that this is an enterprise fund, and so those wages are covered out of the already existing rate structure for solid waste. I'll have Director Von Eye provide any additional information you might need, and then we both will stand by for questions.
Any additional information at this time, Director?
No, I think that was spot on. Thank you.
Chair will entertain a motion to reinstate the position. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Peters. Any discussion or questions, council? Councilman Tupper.
This question's City Manager Mack. So with this, when we reinstate the solid waste manager, at this time we have not set aside a manager's position for the wastewater yet, am I correct?
So we have advertised, so we currently have a wastewater position.
Yeah.
And so we are currently advertising for that as a separate wastewater position.
Okay, that answers my question. Thank you.
Any further questions or comments? Councilman Jurens.
Part of my comment is just regards to, in all the conversation tonight, I just got an update on the Arrows volleyball game. 3-0, they won tonight. I had my shirt on, I took the coat off, it's warmed up in here a little bit.
All right. Don't know where to go with that one. I'm sure the volleyball team is dependent upon our solid waste department as well. Any further questions or comments? All right. The motion is to approve the reinstatement of the position. We will just do a voice vote. All those in favor will please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. Are there any city council member announcements about the volleyball team, perhaps?
I thought I had my only opportunity was back then, so yeah, you can repeat
Or
it if you want to.
introduction of topics for future discussion? Hearing none, is there a city manager report?
Just a brief one, Mayor. So our October work session is scheduled for October 9th. That, however, is Native American Day. And I'd like to request that we move that work session to October 10th. I'd thought about canceling it, but with budgets and our recodification, I think it's important to just continue moving on those processes. And we had also planned to do a sales tax presentation at the October work session. So if you all are okay with it, we'll just plan accordingly for the 10th. 4 is when those work sessions are scheduled to start.
Okay. Anything else, city manager? Okay. Councilman Danforth?
Thank you, Mayor. I'll throw this out to whomever, or you can decide who this goes to, but my understanding, we approved an addendum of dollars to the bike trail that was worked on along Highway 20. Questions I'm getting on that, and good questions, is when is that going to get done? It's been poured for weeks now. When is the grade work on the side of it going to get done? When's that going to open back up?
Director Von Eye?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilman Danforth. I don't have an exact timeline for you. Justin Peterson, the Assistant City Engineer, is not here tonight. We can certainly get that information and share it back with you. But I can say that generally there's a certain degree of patience that comes with these construction projects. What we do when we bid them is we give a completion date, and then once the contractor commences work under their contract that we award, they've got until that completion date in order to finish the work. Now, there's times they'll be here on site and they get a bunch of work done and then they have to leave because of their project schedules. That's an inconvenience for us because we don't see that regular steady progression of work. It's intermittent, but it is within the regulations of their contract in order to be able to do that. The more we tighten our contracts up and say, okay, if you start on this date, you got to end by 3 weeks, that does escalate our prices. That's something we could consider doing on future projects that we've contemplated doing, but it does cause our prices to go up because the contractors lose that latitude to come and go and get it done by an overall completion date. So sorry for the long explanation, but there's some context there on why that is. I believe, I would expect they'd be back within the next couple weeks to put that topsoil back on, to regrade and shape the shoulders or the edges of that pathway and get it all seeded here before fall sets in too heavily.
All right. We do have a reason to go into executive session tonight for contractual discussion. We will not be taking action when we are done. I do need a motion to go into executive session. Motion made by Councilman Tupper, seconded by Councilman Bueller. Any discussion on going into executive session? Hearing none, the motion is to go into executive session. All those in favor will please say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Motion carries. Good night and God bless you, Watertown.